Hello, and welcome to The Fool and the Philosopher.
The Philosopher and The Fool.
I was watching Justice League and Justice League Unlimited, and I think it might be a bad idea, but I think it'd be a bad idea for a government potentially, but I think it'd be a good idea for a human, is to make them mandatory watching in like elementary school or something like that.
I've only watched Unlimited. I've watched a bit of Justice League, but I watched all of Unlimited.
It's mostly Unlimited I'm going to talk about. It's just the first episode of Justice League. What I want to talk about, just the rough overarching theme running through the entire thing.
Okay.
So what happens in Justice League, the very first movie, because Justice League was a series of movies.
Yeah.
But they were played as TV episodes, which I don't know who thought that was a good idea, because you think that would totally lose engagement on people.
It worked quite well, though, actually.
Yeah. I'm impressed it worked.
Well, it worked because Justice League was preempted off Batman the Animated Series and Batman the New Animated Series and Superman the Animated Series. So those were there, and then they had Justice League.
You watch part 2 of the 3-part movie, and then you're like, oh great, and I have to wait until next Sunday to start over again, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
I don't know how they aired it. Maybe they just did a rolling thing throughout the day.
You could buy it in VHS as well, and I think there was a few theatrical releases.
So, the first 3 episodes it's called Secret Origins, and what happens is Senator Carter on Earth, who is not related to President Carter in real life, but Senator Carter is talking about, we have enough power on Earth to destroy it several times over in nuclear weapons, and that's a terrible idea because humans we're constantly at risk. There's the Cold War is over, but we're still in deadly danger at all times. And so he said, I think we need to get rid of nukes. And I said, well, how do we defend ourselves then against Russia or if the America becomes evil, and what stops them from taking over a country like Russia or China or whatever? And so he says, my plan is Superman. I've talked to Superman, and Superman agrees that he will defend the entire world. So he'll disarm all the nukes himself, and he'll defend the world. And this bill gets passed, and Superman starts disarming all the nukes on Earth. And just after Superman and you think, there's immediately problems, like Flash disagrees with it. He says, I'm the fastest guy on Earth, and I can't be everywhere at once.
Yeah.
How's Superman going to protect Earth? And then there's people saying, how can we trust Superman? But then there's a lot of people that say, come on, he's Superman. Like, everyone loves Superman. You can trust Superman. And so what happens, where you think the episode's going, is this tripod comes down to Earth, and it's beating Superman in a fight. And so you think, your first thought is, great, this thing is stronger than Superman, and we just gave away all our nukes. And then Superman runs away from it. And so people are like, because Superman starts injuring it, and they're like, okay. And then it starts winning, and he runs away. And then more of them appear all around Earth until there's hundreds of them all over Earth. And so you think the episode's about, okay, Superman just can't handle it on his own. But these tripods are just the start of a Martian invasion. And so the Martians start coming to Earth, and humanity can't fight back. Their weapons are ineffective. Superman's missing. And it turns out, this is a pretty big spoiler for it, but it came out 2001. I don't know if that counts or not. But you can sort of guess it, but it's such a good twist. I'm surprised they did it, because a lot of time, big companies disappoint me in this sort of thing.
Yeah.
But Carter is actually a Martian. So the guy pushing for nuclear disarmament was a bad guy.
Yeah.
And I think that's really interesting, because it's sort of saying the institution and the danger is good and worth it. And Carter never acts evil. Yeah. Like, he's not like, yes, you need to disarm them. He's like, no, I believe in this, and you should do this. And Superman says, I've talked to him in private a bunch of times, and like, he's never shown as evil. Too often, movies they have them do a little evil side, or it's you're blindsided by it, basically. Where Carter was, he was a Martian infiltrator, getting rid of the only weapon humans had that could actually hurt Martians, besides their superheroes. Yeah. And so he's preempting the invasion, basically. So the invasion starts, and why Superman ran away, it turns out, is that John, whatever his name is.
John Jones.
Oh, wait. Senator Carter is John Carter of Mars. General Wells is H.G. Wells, who wrote War of the Worlds. Yeah. They're all references to Mars. Yes. to famous books about Mars. Yeah. They're all puns. Okay.
That's all superhero names.
But these aren't superhero names. These are just like characters.
That's why I say they're character names. Their actual character name is, like, of the originals, most of them are also puns. Like the later ones, like Bruce Wayne, not so much. Clark Kent, not so much. Like those ones beforehand. But when you get to Black Canary's actual name and I think.
But I'm talking about just like these side characters,
Yeah.
like Senator Carter and General Wells.
Yeah.
And General Wells, he's this mean, rough sort of guy, but he's like, we need to keep nukes. What if we have to fight someone like Superman, or we have to fight the Russians or whatever? But he turned out to be right.
Yeah.
And so it's not an easy option. And so but what it turns out the reason Superman fled was because John was psychically invading his mind, like the Martian Manhunter, and saying, "Come save me! The government has captured me."
Yeah.
And I came. And so what happened was he came to Earth ahead of the invasion with a flower that could paralyze and wipe them out. But he went to the government head, and they captured him and destroyed the flower studying it.
And he went to Earth and was like, "Ooh, alien capture!"
Yeah, and so they totally destroyed the only hope they had, basically. And so they capture him, and Superman frees him, and then John, now outside of the facility, is able to send out a stronger psychic signal, and he summons all the greatest heroes on Earth that he knows about. And so this is the original Justice League.
Yeah.
So he summons like Flash and Wonder Woman and Batman and Green Lantern and
Hawk Girl.
And I don't know why he would summon Batman from that list. Like, it seems
Guy has a lot of resources.
like, you think Lex Luthor would be a better choice in some ways. Like, Lex Luthor also wants to protect Earth.
Yeah.
And, well, not in this Justice League. He's, like, when he merges with Brainiac, he wants to wipe out the universe. So,
Well, that's because he merged with Brainiac.
but he seems on board. It's like, I don't know.
Yes, I mean, later on in the episode, you see what Batman does to the Martian.
Yeah, I mean, Batman wins the whole thing, I guess. But,
Yeah.
because Batman...
Like, most people's perspective, like, people are like, oh, Batman's not that great, or Batman's not that strong. Everyone who says Batman's strong, there are people who've come from Justice League Unlimited and Justice League. Like, the Batman from that is like, this guy.
Actually, I have a question so there's in Justice League Unlimited, Lex Luthor hijacks the Watchtower and gets us to bombard Earth. And Batman says there's only 3 people on Earth that are smart enough to hijack the Watchtower, and 2 of them are on the Watchtower. So it must be Lex Luthor that did it.
Yeah.
So my question is, who are those 3 people? Like, obviously Mr. Terrific.
Yeah.
Obviously Lex Luthor. But the third one, like, is it Batman?
Yes, it's Batman.
Because he didn't say there's 2 people besides me. He just says there's 3 people.
Yeah, it's Batman, Mr. Terrific, and
Lex Luthor. Because I was thinking like the Riddler maybe, but he wouldn't be on the Watchtower.
Who else would be on the Watchtower if his... I'm pretty certain he means Batman, but maybe the Atom?
Yeah, he's like a very smart little physicist dude, right?
He's genius.
But it's his wrong special field of...
Yeah.
Like Gorilla Grodd, maybe?
Well, he won't be on...
And I guess he specializes in mind control.
Yeah.
Yeah,
no, I can only think of Mr. Terrific and Batman, who are on the Justice.
Red Tornado, is he good with technology?
He's like better than your average Joe, but he's not great.
Right. And then...
The Flash can brute force.
Superman's friend, what's his name? The redhead dude?
He wasn't a character in the Justice League.
Yeah, he is.
Oh, he is?
Yeah, there's a part where Huntress kidnaps him.
He's basically Elon Musk.
Jimmy Olsen. Not the rich dude.
No.
Jimmy Olsen, the reporter.
Yeah.
Yeah, Jimmy, he's good with tech, I think.
Not that good.
No.
But maybe one of the Robins
is
also good enough to hack, because they're really good at hacking. I think it's Dick. No, not Dick. Robin number 3 is really good at hacking.
I'm just thinking it would be like a Batman villain, probably, right? Like the Riddler or like...
Bane? No. Bane's smart, but he's not tech savvy.
Mr. Freeze, like those sort of...
Again, even the Riddler and Bane have specializations.
Yeah. Or like the Mirror Master.
Mirror Master's kind of an idiot.
Well, okay. No, who's... Captain Boomerang I find weird. Because, well, his boomerangs are like stronger than like the best government munitions.
Yeah.
Like he's doing something weird.
Yeah. So did you come to the episode with the Achenenon protocol?
No.
Okay, that's the one where they use Batman's own things against him.
No, I haven't. Yeah, that's
because there's the movie version of that, which I believe we watched.
Yeah, possibly, yeah.
Yeah, but there's also just a Justice League episode with it.
Right. So, anyways, getting back to the thing. So, Martian Manhunter assembles the Justice League.
Yeah.
And
it's like, why is Hawk Girl here? What's she got? Just a mace.
Yeah. And they take down the aliens. They win.
Yeah.
And they say, okay, this was a threat to all of Earth, and it was going to kill Earth off, but we were able to stop it. We should keep doing this. This is a good idea. Because Earth needs something that can fight these, because the humans couldn't fight it. Now, you could argue they couldn't fight it because they didn't have nukes, but they still couldn't fight it.
using nukes to fight a battle like that isn't the greatest
Fight
option
battles
as
in
well.
because they all land in major cities as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they were able to
Well,
win.
even if the spaceships are coming in, you have time to hit them with nukes. That's not great because
I noticed throughout all the Justice League Unlimited episodes, they do stuff like they show people just going for a walk and they're going through the park in the city, right?
Yeah.
And then the watchtower shoots its beam down into the center of the city. And you see like cars go flying 100 feet and you see buildings explode and you see like the windows all shatter, right? And bridges collapse. And you're like, holy cow. But then what you see is the people crawl out of the cars and they look out the broken windows and you're like, cowards.
PG-12.
It's like, but you see what they're trying to say. Like, they nuked the city, basically.
Yeah.
Like, a million people just died. But there was no casualties.
My question, why does the watchtower have that pointed at her?
Well, they use it for a good purpose.
Yeah.
That's how people discovered it in the first place. Yeah, so the Justice League is assembled. And then at the end of the episode, Batman builds the watchtower. And, well, I don't actually quite understand it. Like, he pays for it.
He's had it.
Who built it?
Who built it? Well, there's a great
Because
Batman the Animated Series episode where it shows the guy who makes his car, and he has like this one decade mechanic.
like Lucius Fox or whatever?
No, it's not Lucius. He has this specialist mechanic and his daughter that have this hidden
And not Steel.
not Steel. I can't remember his name, but it's just like they have
Steel could maybe hack the watchtower.
they have this hidden garage in Gotham, and this guy just works for Batman, and he knows that he makes his car. Then some villains basically figure out who it is. I think it's even the Joker figures it out and kidnaps him by going through like his shell companies. And so at the end of the episode, Batman basically makes better shell companies to keep this guy funded and does some stuff so he's not as easy to find or get the car. But there's a whole episode about car maker. But I mean, it could be Lucius and the Wayne Foundation. They are a research and development company that specializes in researching weaponry and medicine and advanced technology.
But what Batman says, like, because Superman asks, how'd you pay for this? Because, like, someone can trace your books. And he said, oh, it's hidden in a line in my aeronautical research department or whatever. Yeah. But still, someone would have built it and been like, why is Wayne Foundation paying for this? Or whatever.
Mr. Terrific.
Yeah. So anyways, he builds the watchtower and they say, okay, now we can defend Earth. So then there's the whole Justice League. It's 2 or 3 seasons of movies about the Justice League, building up, getting stronger and stronger, recruiting like Vigilante and Shining Knight. And so then you have episode 1 of Justice League Unlimited. It starts with Green Arrow, who is one of the few heroes on Earth who hasn't joined Justice League. And he says, I don't want to join because I want to be able to, I don't want to be beholden to your rules and your laws and regulations. I want to be able to help the little guy.
Yeah.
I don't want to just be this big picture sort of thing. I want to be able to see the people and talk to them. And they say, you can still do that, but we can deploy you more effectively. And
yeah, Batman's like, bro, come on.
Yeah. And so eventually they get him to join. And he says he agrees to stay because he'll keep them honest.
Yeah.
He says, okay, I'll stay because I'm the one that's going to be able to keep you honest. So they get Green Arrow on. And Green Arrow, in a different episode, this is later, or I think, but he says, like, I'm a bleeding heart lefty type. I'm a classic liberal, no nukes, all that sort of stuff. And that comes in importance later. So you go into a few episodes into Justice League Unlimited, and a threat worse than the Martians, but it only takes up a single episode, happens, where it's called the Dark Heart attacks Earth. And it's a gray goo device.
It's the gray goo. That's where it comes from.
Yeah. And, well, gray goo's been around before.
The concept of the name for it, gray goo, comes from the Dark Heart because it's a gray goo.
No, I think the gray goo name was earlier too. But
okay.
So anyways, the Dark Heart attacks Earth, and it's a self-replicating nanomachine factory, which doesn't really make sense. But the idea is that the robots are so complex they need a central computer to direct them, and so the Dark Heart is that computer.
Yeah.
And the robots are like a normal soldier can take on a robot. But there's billions of them, and they can eat anything and turn into more robots, and they can repair themselves. And so they're taking over Earth. And the only person they think that can stop a nano swarm like this is the Atom, because he's an expert in nanomachinery. But they have to get him, and he's on the other side of the planet. And so they need a diversion to stop this massive swarm of robots, and they don't really have anything on that scale. So they use the watchtower to shoot a laser that carves a trench around the entire invasion and annihilate all the robots that have been getting out of Nevada or whatever it is. And this buys them enough time to get the atom in and stop the Dark Heart. But what it also does is the government looks and they say, wait a minute, all the strongest people on Earth was scary enough. But now they have a weapon stronger than a nuke pointed at Earth at all times, and they can fire it at their own discretion, and we have no control over it. We have no say. We have no defense against it. It's basically what Star Wars was fought about. Like during the Cold War, the whole, we need the first person that can stop missiles from hitting our country wins. Justice League did it. They won the Cold War.
Yeah.
And so they're a superpower, and they're the strongest superpower, stronger than Russia, stronger than the United States. And they're terrifying. And that's sort of Green Arrow's purpose throughout the entire Justice League Unlimited is he's the guy that's like, yeah, you're terrifying.
Yeah.
I'm just a normal guy, and you guys
just your normal billionaire who shoots arrows at...
Yeah, but he's still, you know, if he gets like flicked by Superman, he's dead.
Yeah.
And so he's terrified by all of this. But he's the guy trying to keep them honest and fight for what's right. And there's a few people like that, like the Question and like
Huntress is kind of...
Huntress sort of, but well, they say she goes too far, but that's interesting because now they're deciding what's too far and what isn't. And so now they can kick people out at their discretion that disagree with them. And so that makes them even more scary, right?
Yeah.
And so the government, after seeing the Watchtower go off, they decide to form Cadmus, which is a organization designed to counteract superheroes. And they create Super Power Girl. They create Power Girl, and they create the Suicide Squad, and they create a bunch of other...
Did they make Captain...
Atom?
Yeah.
No, but Captain Atom is a soldier first and a member of the Justice League second, so they can give him orders. Okay. And they do at one point. They tell him to bring in Superman.
Yeah.
Which doesn't work. Because even without his powers, Superman's a better hand-to-hand fighter, so it's kind of...
Yeah.
It's... it didn't really work, but he's one of the few people that can
slow Superman
slow him down at least. Yeah. So they create this organization, but the thing is, Power Girl will she goes around assassinating people, and she also she'll like throw a car with a person in it to kill someone else, and then you have two people that are dead, and you have the Suicide Squad. They're deadly. They don't care about casualties. You have the Ultramen, who they also create, who are quite good people, and they're quite powerful, so they're nice, except that they're unstable clones that die every 3 months.
Yeah.
And so they're causing the Ultramen are just dying constantly, and they're recloning them. So they've created this horrible system where these teenagers that just die again and again and again. And it's like Supergirl, she goes and she's mad. Something's wrong with her. Power Girl, sorry. Something's wrong with her brain. She's crazy. And so Cadmus, everything they do causes more harm than good. A lot of the problems that you see are Cadmus experiments that break out or go wrong. And there's some, I'm trying to remember, there was one that was on a level that was actually, it was like threatening Earth to some degree. I'm trying to remember what it was.
Was the android a Cadmus project?
Oh, he might have been, yeah. Amazo.
Yeah.
Yeah, Amazo might have been. Cadmus steals Hephaestus's battle armor as well.
Oh.
That indestructible armor.
Yeah.
And then they give it to that wizard, I don't think it's Enchantress, but it's basically she's got the purple hair and the weird cat eyes, and
I can't remember. There's
Felix Faust is her master.
There are so many characters Unlimited.
Yeah. Anyways, they give it to her, and she's already in the gray area.
Yeah.
And then Felix Faust tricks her, and he breaks and he takes over the army, and he uses it to take over Hades, because it's this ridiculously powerful armor. It's powered by rage, and it's indestructible.
So if Batman has that armor.
Well, no, it's powered by the rage of others.
Oh.
So the more you fight it, the stronger it becomes.
Okay.
And so you can't beat it, basically. Except Hawk Girl can, I think, because...
Her mace is stupid.
Her mace disrupts magic, yeah.
It does more than that, but that's one of its things.
Well, it's indestructible. But yeah, it disrupts magic, so she can use it. She can actually damage it.
It disrupts anything. You can hit Superman with that mace and he gets hurt.
So...
That's how the Hawk people invaded.
Cadmus is trying to stop this superpower, and it's making the world worse.
Yeah.
But they're terrified of it. And there's an episode where... Right. So Lex Luthor hacks the Watchtower, and he causes it to target Cadmus. And so what happens first is the Question is captured by Cadmus, because the Question is poking around Lex Luthor's territory. And Cadmus captures him, because Lex Luthor and Cadmus are working together, because Lex Luthor's reformed. And they capture Question. So Superman goes into Cadmus and destroys the entire facility, takes out all their soldiers, and rescues Question. And that Cadmus is like, we built this entire thing to be able to defeat Superman, and we can't.
Yeah.
Like, we can't stop him still. We have Captain Atom, he can't stop him, we just can't do it. So they're even more terrified, so they leave the facility, but Lex Luthor doesn't know that. And he hacks the Watchtower to fire on their facility. And he annihilates it, and it blows up a city. And just before that, Lex Luthor had opened a new city, a little small, like 30,000 population town, that had what looked like a bomb in it, but it was actually the power source for the city. It was a totally harmless power source.
That one, good.
And Superman tries to tear apart the city, getting to the bomb, and Shazam tries to stop him. And they destroy this entire city of 30,000 people. It's for orphans.
Yeah.
It's a city for orphans, and Superman destroys it. And so his reputation's already in the toilet. And then it gets even worse when the Watchtower annihilates a even bigger city and like wipes out a bunch of stuff. And so the Justice League decides to disband after that point.
Yeah.
And this, why I say this should be in all schools, is because it shows how terrifying an entity is that has all the power, and what the government isn't acting unreasonably, but they're causing more harm than good. And so I think I think it was probably an analogy to the Cold War, but what you can do it in the modern day where people talk about the Ukrainian war, right? And they say obviously Russia's evil and corrupt, but then other people are saying obviously the United States is this horrible imperial power, right? But another way you can look at it is the United States is the Justice League, and the United States is incredibly powerful, and they do make mistakes, and they do cause untold amounts of damage. But do you want to get rid of them? And then you see what happens when the alien invasion happens, and then do you see... And there isn't a clear answer. It's actually a very complex question. And what happens when Superman disbands the Justice League is that Green Arrow, who was the guy that was most against the Justice League, says, you don't get to. And he's like, what? He's like, you forced me to come on, and you did all this stuff, and you can run away, but I'm staying. Yeah. And the rest of us are staying, and we're going to fight even if we don't have you. But the Justice League needs Superman, so you have to stay.
Is that when they start the Hall of Justice instead?
They start on the Earth base so that they can actually talk to people. And
yeah, because I always thought it's interesting how it worked, because in the older ones it was the Hall of Justice. It's the Super Friends at the Hall of Justice. And then later on it's like, oh, we have the cool Watchtower, and so they move to the Watchtower. But in Justice League Unlimited, they start in the Watchtower, then they move down to the Hall of Justice.
And what's the lesson there? It's that even the best intentions, right? If you are operating so far above the common man that you don't understand their plight, you don't understand that you're causing them fear and chaos, and you don't understand when a power source is just a power source, and you don't understand when a person is innocent or not, and how terrifying you are to them. No matter how good your intentions are, you become disconnected from them. And so you want to keep that communication channel going. And so the United States, let's take that as an example again, as the Justice League. The more they withdraw into the Watchtower of, I know what's best for you, I'm not going to tell you why. Like with stuff like the pandemic, with stuff like wars, with stuff like CIA activities, assassinations, maybe those are the best things for them. But what they do is they deny them, or they say, no, we never did anything wrong, or they say, they do all these things that bring them further away from the people. And maybe they are making the best choices in all these situations. But obviously they're also making mistakes. And what you do when you make a mistake, and this happens with the Justice League as well, is you cover up the mistake, because if people lose trust in you, that's even worse than the mistake itself. But the problem is when you do that, you actually widen the gap of distrust even more and even more and even more, because there's people like the Question out there who dig into the stuff and figure it out.
Yeah.
And the truth always comes out. And when the truth comes out, it'll be worse the more you were covering it up to try to prevent everything. When I read The Great Reset by Klaus Schwab and whoever else helped him write it. And throughout it, he has this point again and again and again. People distrust the government, and that's terrible, because then the government can't fully enact all its powers. And they distrust the government because it's ineffective. But if they gave it more power, it could be effective. The only thing that's preventing it from being effective is more power. And he's not wrong in a lot of ways, right? Like, the more power you give a government, the more effective it can be. But if the government isn't doing anything to earn your trust before you give it power, then you really don't want to give it power. Even if they're like, look, if you gave me unlimited power, I could finally do good things, but because I don't have unlimited power, I have to do dodgy things. It's like, you're not the person I want to give power to.
Yeah.
Because when will you decide you have enough power that you can start doing good stuff? Like, how much do you need to centralize until... Like, you look at someone like Putin. He comes into office, and in 2 years or something, he quadruples the average income, of like, real income of your average Russian person. I'd vote him in for life. Like,
Yeah.
like he comes in his first few years, he does that, right? And you're like, that's amazing. And then he starts fixing other things. He gets rid of corruption. He roots out the Soviets. He does all these things. But of course, there's dissenters, and it's like, okay, look, I could just make Russia a great modern country if there wasn't these people who kept. Okay, so I'm going to put him in prison, and he's going to die in a plane crash, and you say, yeah, well, that's horrible with Russia. That's the Russian corruption. The same thing. Now you can say it's a different scale, right? In the States, you have these journalists that die mysteriously. You have these whistleblowers that die. You have the CIA talking about their heart attack guns. You have world leaders that are suddenly called communist by a bunch of people, suddenly have the people overthrow them, and they have all these resources that came out of nowhere. Or you have Cuba was invaded by the United States.
On that scale, it is explained by someone from the old world, and like Eastern Europe explained this, and it's, you don't believe that your system can be corrupt yet, but our system's so old that, yeah, it's corrupt, and we know it's corrupt, and we accept the corruption, and so it's like, yeah, there's corruption, there's problems, they are doing dodgy things. They've been doing dodgy things for 1,000 years. Whereas United States and Canada were so young country-wise and governing-wise. It's like, no, we have the system. We're good.
But I think
we don't have that yet.
The thing that the Justice League does very well, and that that I think is really important, is you get people, they go into full, like, spoon, the aristocratic utensil, right?
Yeah.
I saw him say, I want Russia to win because the institution that is the United States imperialism needs to be torn down. So you have people that say that, right? And what he's correctly identified, I think, personally, is that the United States is a massive imperial power that is controlling the world and is trying to crush Russia through the Ukraine war, bleed them dry, make them stop being a superpower, right? I think he's correct there, and I think that the military-industrial complex is benefiting hugely from this, and I think that's part of the reason as well. And that isn't good, because they have incentives to start wars that make them money. But the question that comes in here is, okay, so they're doing all that. Do you want them to not do all that? Because what's worse, right? Like you say, okay, Superman is causing all this destruction through his accidents and his own arrogance and whatever else, but do you want the world without Superman instead? And I'm not saying that, yes, I want Superman. Maybe you don't want Superman, but you have to say, it's not an easy choice either way.
No.
It's like, okay, the United States is an empire. I hate it. I talked about this on the podcast when it turned out, with all the trials that Trudeau's going through, the reason he shut down the trucker protest was not because they were personally affecting him, even though they were, and it's not because they were endangering people, it's because Biden said to him, you're affecting the automobile industry in the United States with your protests. And so, like, okay, we got to crack down to get the economy going. It's like, oh, so we're just a puppet of the United States.
Yeah.
We're just the 51st state. And there's a lot of countries like that, like Japan, Germany,
UK,
the UK, us,
France.
I don't know. Well, I'm not sure about France or not, but there's a lot of countries that the United States is basically the leader of and can say what they do. And there's also countries like Iraq, formerly, or maybe still, I'm not sure, and Iran, formerly, I believe, where they did this thing where they went in and they gave the government tons. Israel was a great example. They give them tons and tons of money and tons of weapons, and they say, we're here to help you. We're just, or African countries as well, they do this a lot, where they go in and they say, here's tons of food, here's tons of resources, we're going to help you out. And it's charity, right? It's just great. Yeah. But the thing is, the moment you do something we don't like, we take back our charity.
Yeah.
It's called soft power, right? And so they're dictating what these countries do. China has a different version of it, where they
Belt and Road,
where they go into, they do it a lot in Africa now, but they used to do it in India. But they go in and they build a giant harbor, and they say, we'll give you a discount on all the trade goods that we bring in.
There's something actually on that, which is, I think it's almost pettiness that China does. And when I say this, so when the UK owned Hong Kong, right?
Yeah.
And they said, okay, we'll give it back to you in 99 years. That was the deal. And they broke that. But so what they do is they will build these harbors and things.
No, they didn't break it.
Okay.
No.
So they'll build these harbors and things. And they'll build like this railroads. And they say, we own this for 99 years. They actually give the exact same deal that was with Hong Kong. And so it's like this sort of petty irony that they enact of, we'll do this too.
You know, what happened with Hong Kong, as I remember and understand it, was the time expired and China got Hong Kong back. And then Hong Kong didn't want to go back. And China said, no, you're ours now. And that was where the whole protest started. And eventually, and that went on for like a decade-ish. And then China finally said, okay, fine, we're just taking it.
Okay.
We're just going to take it fully. Yeah. So it was the people that were the problem, not the British.
Okay.
But then Britain said to the Hong Kong people, you all have citizenship in Britain if you want, because they felt responsible.
Yeah.
Which was I think that was quite fair of them. That was, where's it going? So the United States has soft power in a bunch of countries. It can talk to the leaders of other countries and say, hey, do this because you're annoying us. And so I really didn't like that. I was like, Canada is not its own country. We're not even part of the Commonwealth. We're part of the American Empire.
Yeah.
Like, if the Queen says, hey, do this, and it's like, well, that's a different story, right? Because the Queen was in charge. But this is Biden saying it. And it's like, wait, Biden's not in charge of us. What's going on? But what are we going to do? Fight them? Like, we'd lose. And same with, I don't know if Mexico's feels the same, but, they would lose too.
Yeah.
So I'm sure that if Biden says, hey, sort out... I think Trump did do that. He said, sort out your south border. And they're like, okay, boom, there's a wall. And, well, I think they wanted one anyways. But, like, Mexican south border I'm talking about. Because that's much easier. What I don't actually understand is why Trump didn't say, we're going to build a wall on Mexico's southern border. Because that would be so much easier. It's tiny.
Yeah.
And the problem isn't the Mexicans so much.
No.
Or I don't want to say that the immigrants are the problem. What I mean is that a people isn't the problem, the numbers are. Yeah. And the numbers aren't coming from Mexico.
Yeah.
The numbers are coming from South America and Central America. And Mexico doesn't like them coming up either. So
they're coming from more than just South America. India and China are also...
Yeah, I heard that. That doesn't make sense to me. I haven't looked into it, but like, why wouldn't they just go straight for the United States? Like, is it easier to get into a South American country? Or?
I think it's easier to go over the border without being checked than trying to fly in. Because one of the things that they're also...
But if you're boating to the Americas, can't you just boat?
No, they're not boating to the Americas. They fly to... So there's parts of South America where you actually don't need a visa to get in. You can just land there. And so you land there, and then you travel south. And what north. And what some of them are doing is then once they get into Mexico, they fly from Mexico. These are the richer ones. They fly Mexico to Canada, and then they go in from the northern border into the States. And so there's a huge problem right now of the United States has people coming in from both border sides that aren't Mexican or Canadian.
Weird. And you think that would be expensive, dangerous? Like, wow.
Yeah, it's very dangerous. It's ridiculously dangerous. A lot of people are dying.
Because I've heard...
That's a road. So there's a path that they're taking, which is like through this stretch of jungle. And it's one of the most dangerous paths in the world to take. And tons of people are dying going on it.
Yeah, because like, well, it depends where you come in, but there's like the Amazon.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there's other obstacles as well. I don't know how
even the path through parts of Central America.
Yeah, well, like going through Colombia or something. I don't know what's...
quite dangerous.
Or like Costa Rica. Like Costa Rica, I don't know if it's dangerous on a like murderers everywhere sense, but there's...
Animals.
There's animals. There's like jaguars and stuff.
Yeah.
And there's also...
Poison vipers.
And it's quite a... they have a very high level of thievery as well in Costa Rica. I don't know if that matters when you're a massive caravan, but...
Yeah.
But, like, I mean, France has a very high rate of thievery too. And I'm sorry, Rome and Paris do. Yeah. But, you know, I don't hear about, like, careful walking through... Well, I don't know. Anyways. I guess illegal immigrants make a pretty easy target for stealing from, though, because who are they going to go to? The police?
Yeah.
I mean, because they go to the police, and the police are like, oh, why should we care about you? So that's dangerous, too. You're, like, there's going to be people picking you off, because it's, like, putting you into slavery, because you...
There probably is a large amount of them being captured and put into slavery.
Like, human trafficking and whatnot, because it's like, who's going to vouch for you? You run away to the government, and they're like, we don't have any records of you, and there's no... Like, if you get... let's say you're in Colombia and someone kidnaps you, Colombian government isn't going to be like, hey, this person hasn't paid their taxes in like 3 weeks. Where are they? Because there's no one to pay taxes in the first place. Yeah. So you're not even going to show up on a missing persons report.
Sorry, that's just incredibly cynical that the government will only look for you once you're kidnapped if you're not paying taxes.
Well, I mean, like, how there's nothing to alert them, right?
Yeah, I know there's nothing to alert them.
You have no friends or family to say they're missing. Yeah. You have no taxes. You have no water bills. You have nothing. Yeah. You have no trace for people to be. You could say the propane company is not going to say, hey, they haven't paid.
Yeah.
There's just nothing to.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that in general. It's like, this guy hasn't paid taxes in a while.
Now we care about him.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the United States is an imperial power, and it sucks to have them controlling what your country does, because it's like, hey, I thought our country was our own country. But on the other hand, when you look at the fall of empires, like the Ottomans, like the Romans, like the British, there's always chaos, right? Like there's always the Pax Romanus, the Pax Britannicus, there's all Pax Britannia. They were holding the world together, and then they disappear, and chaos erupts as all these people suddenly either want to take back their land, or were being forced not to fight, suddenly start fighting again, or people think they can carve a slice out for themselves now that they're not afraid of anyone, right? Like the Americans right now, you're not going to attack like France or Poland because you don't want to fight the Americans.
Yeah.
Like there's a reason that Russia is attacking Ukraine and not Poland, for example, because if you attack Poland, suddenly you have the United States. Well, there's two reasons why you wouldn't attack Poland, but one of them is that you're suddenly at war with the United States if you attack Poland. And the second reason is that for some reason Poland has special powers to use nukes if they get attacked by Russia. So I don't know why that's a provision, but it's a scary one.
Yeah.
So they're keeping peace, right? You don't see if the United States disappears, maybe Russia stops at Ukraine, maybe it doesn't. Maybe China goes, you know what? I'm taking back Taiwan. Maybe I'm taking.
Or if the United States
maybe I'm taking Vietnam. Maybe I'm taking Korea.
Japan goes, let's get our destiny again of whatever that was called.
Or maybe China says, I'm going to conquer Japan.
Yeah.
Or maybe France and Germany say, you know what? The Alsace-Lorraine, we never really solved that. Because when you have a world power, all the little petty things, they disappear. Maybe France and England start saying, you know what? I want Normandy back.
Well, do you know about the Great Game? It was basically Britain and France and a few of the other countries, I think Spain, trying to stop Russia and Germany from uniting. It's like, basically, it's to stop these two powers they consider their enemies becoming allies. And so they were doing it for hundreds of years of stopping Prussia or whatever, like that whole area.
Well, so it might have been, there was a North Prussia and a South Prussia, and they were both quite powerful, but they were weaker individually than something like France or England. And that was Bismarck's big thing, was uniting the two major Prussian powers. So it might have been that.
The Great Game definitely has to deal with Russia.
Okay. So, how Bismarck actually did it, I was reading about it. It's quite... I don't think he really planned it. I think it was more opportunity. So what happened was
Still takes a great man to jump on opportunity.
Well, and to think this through.
Yeah, and to recognize it.
So what happened was the King of Spain died, and the inheritor to the Spanish throne was a Prussian. And France was like, okay, we've got Prussians on one side.
We don't want Prussians on the other.
We don't want Prussians on the other. So they went to the Prussian kings, and they said, can you please not put your son on, or whoever it was, on the Spanish throne? And the Prussians said, we understand, that it's scary and whatnot, but, it's...
You don't want to be the jam in a Prussian sandwich.
Well, they said, it's hereditary law. Yeah. Sorry, we're going to do it anyways. But, we understand that that's a problem. But they were both very polite to each other, right? And I don't know how Bismarck did this, but he got a hold of the correspondence between France and Prussia. And he deleted a bunch of words from each and then ran it through the papers. And so everyone was like, France demands that Prussia not put a king on the throne, and Prussia says, no, you losers, basically. And so France was like, okay, how dare you? And they attacked northern Prussia. And then Bismarck, who lived in southern Prussia, went to northern Prussia, and he's like, hey, I told you these... No, sorry, they attacked Bismarck's country. I think Bismarck was in northern Prussia, maybe. But anyways, because basically Bismarck kept going to the other Prussia and saying, come on, we got to join and form Germany. Come on, and they're like, no, we're not going to do it. And so France attacks, because they're like, how dare you do this deception, and how dare you lie about what we said, and how dare you respond so rudely. And so they declare war, and then Bismarck went to the other Prussia, and he's like, see how scary France is? We got to unite in order to take on France. And they're like, yeah, you're right, France is too dangerous, we have to unite. And so then they united and crushed France, took back a bunch of land, and then they wrote the Charter of Germany, or whatever it was called, in Versailles, the Palace of Versailles, which was the Sun King's place, but they're like, this is our capital now. We took it from... So that's how he did it. But the Justice League...
Sorry, just a bit of history, because I almost heard... In World War I, then, did France get a huge amount of its land back from Prussia? That was then Germany?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, they got... So the Alsace-Lorraine throughout all of Europe's history, basically, has been traded back and forth between France and Germany. Or the, the Frankish and the German tribes. And France, after World War II, I think it was, maybe, but they got it sort of definitely now, so they're like, this is ours now. But the people...
There's a bunch of German people living in France.
Yes, and actually, I don't know when this happened, but I think this is the French-German border. If you zoom into the border, there's a bunch of, like, German towns in France and a bunch of French towns in Germany.
Yeah.
And they're, like, owned by the opposite country. Because they're like, look, let's not fight about this. Let's just say you get the French town, we get the German town, and just keep it all clean. Well, it's a very messy border, but it's...
Yeah, it's not as bad as the Indian border, but that's a different story.
But, yeah, it was the World Wars where France got a bunch of this land.
Okay.
And then it was the whole... the continual encroachment on this land that really ticked off Hitler in when he was younger, with the whole beer hall push and whatnot. Well, that was Bohemia that was doing that, but if I recall correctly, the Justice League Unlimited, it takes this very complicated, large political idea, and instead of it being people saying, you like Russia, you're supporting an authoritarian dictator, or like you hate America, all you say is America bad, and you're just a pro-Russia simp or whatever.
Russophile.
Or you just want the world to be conquered by Russia, or you're an idiot that's falling for Russian propaganda. It's like, no, the United States is very scary, and if Russia loses the Ukraine war, I said this before, I think personally, if Russia loses the Ukrainian war, they lose every war. But, like, I don't think they're a major player on Earth anymore, because they show that they couldn't even take a small country. It cracks their base, right? And they also... Ukraine is going to do something if they win, right? They're going to join NATO, or they're not going to sit idly. They're going to be like, we're not having this happen again. We're building, the name lost my head. What did France build along their border with Germany? The Maginot Line. Yeah. We're building a Maginot Line along the Russian border. We're joining NATO. We're doing all these, like, you had.
We're getting that Polish special privilege of using nukes if Russia attacks.
Already you have Finland joining NATO, which they had never done before. And they have a long history of fighting Russia, and they're right on the border with Russia, and now they're in NATO. And you had Switzerland say, we're against Russia's actions, which I don't think they should have done, but they did do. And so you have the most neutral country on Earth now saying, we don't like Russia. So even if Russia wins, they still have that legacy to deal with. But they... So it doesn't look good for Russia in any way, even if they win. But if they lose, they get all of that. Plus, they have this now reinforced fortress for the United States on their border with Ukraine. And so it sucks for them. But so you can say, okay, well then, yeah, the United States is the bad guy here. But it's not that simple either. It's the United States has a lot of power, and with a ton of power comes the ability to abuse it. And the United States does abuse it. There's records of them abusing it. They abuse it all the time. And if they have no foe, if there's no one that can match the United States, like let's say we think the United States are good now. They have a bit of corruption here and there. They make mistakes here and there. But overall, they're doing it in the best interest. They do believe in their values. And let's say we also agree, because this is something I don't think enough of the discourse is about, democracy and liberalism and freedom of speech. Those are our values. They aren't the world values. And so you can say we want the whole world to be liberal, but that's an imperial belief. Like, we're going to liberate China, we're going to liberate all these countries, it's going to be great. That's the same as being a Jesuit missionary going into Canada and the United States and saying, these poor, unenlightened natives, I'm going to enlighten them on the ways, I'm going to get rid of their old gods, and I'm going to, or going up to the Norse and saying, I'm going to get rid of your old gods, and I'm going to teach you the proper ways of Christ. We decry them. We're like, these people destroyed these religions. We're doing the exact same thing, but now it's not about religion, it's about ideology. We're saying the British way of democracy and freedom is the correct way forward. And, I do think that's true, but that doesn't mean it is. And that doesn't mean it is for everyone. And but let's say it is. Let's say it is, and the world would be a better place if everyone took on the British values. Once the United States wins everywhere, and there's no one left to stop them, and they were good all the way along with just a couple of mistakes here and there and a bit of corruption here and there, but it wasn't ever corruption on an entire systems level. It was the corruption of individuals taking advantage of the system. Once you control everything, you have no reason to be good anymore. that's when the corruption gets really bad, because you have no one that can call you out for it. And anyone that does call you out for it is a threat to the stability of your great system, because you have this perfect system. And so now you need to get rid of the dissenters. You have, I don't know how true they are, I don't know if you've looked into this, but in Germany you have considering banning the political party that's doing really well because it's a threat to democracy.
Yeah, they're trying to get powers to name them terrorists. Because then you can stop a terrorist party from being elected.
And who is doing... Like, is it just fringe people saying, like...
It's the Green Party, and the Power Coalition in Germany is trying to do this actively.
Right. Wait, is the Green Party part of this new party, or...?
The Green Party is a part of the coalition
really?
in Power Party in Germany. The Green Party had power forever, then they actually lost it, so they had to form a coalition.
Germany, historically, the Green parties are kind of fascist. So yeah. I was thinking they would be on the side of APD, I think is the new party. Yeah. I'm not saying the APD is fascist necessarily. I just think that would be funny if the Green Party was part of them.
Yeah, so they're active, like the part, it's not fringes, it's the active party is trying to label them terrorists or say you can't run. They're trying to apply laws basically to stop their opposition from running.
And then you have...
Germans doing a Germany.
Then you have... Yeah, they've never liked democracy in Germany. It's
literally, when I was hearing about this and reading a little bit about it, in my mind, it's just, oh, those Germans.
Bless their little hearts. They can't help themselves.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think, if we had the choice to intervene and say, look, you have to allow this democratic process to go through, right? Like, come on. This is German culture. They need a tyrant every 30 years, yeah. or they start getting a little itchy, and they start feeling off.
Give them a few feet of the French border.
They haven't tried to conquer Europe in like 70 years.
Yeah,
it's getting kind of rough out there. So I feel bad for them. Like, can they just
give them like a small piece of Poland?
How about Slovakia? Right? Like, who cares about Slovakia?
And just a piece of Belgium.
The Rhineland is practically theirs already.
Yeah.
Like, just give it over to them. And like Austria, they're German. Like they are a German people. They're just in a different country. Just give them Austria. Come on. And just give them Austria.
Was it for a while the European Union was the...
Yeah, that was their best attempt.
Yeah. Although apparently France is in more control of the Union now than Germany.
Oh, poor Germans. But I mean, the Franks were a Germanic people originally.
Yeah, well, the French also try to take over Europe all the time as well. So.
Yeah, but they do it from a more like
garlic.
Well, they do it from a more principled stance.
Yeah.
Like you have Charlemagne and Napoleon and whatnot. They're these people that we look back on fondly. Oh, that might be time. I don't think Germany will ever be looked back on fondly though, because of the Holocaust.
Yeah.
I think if the Holocaust hadn't happened, Germany would have, like Hitler would have been a Napoleonic type figure. Well, not quite, because maybe like Kaiser Wilhelm like figure. Because the problem with comparing Hitler to Napoleon is Napoleon was an amazing general, and Hitler was a terrible general. Yeah. So you can't really compare them that way. But the cartoon just does a really good job of saying, hey, there's nuance here. This is a difficult choice. And I see all these people... I brought up Spoon because he came on the Thinkers the other day, the Thinkers podcast, and he got in a massive argument with one of the people on there about the Ukrainian war, and I didn't really understand what either side was saying. Just everyone seemed to be too rude for the situation. It was like, why do you care so much about this? Like, that's the wrong way to phrase it. Maybe it's a war. These are your friends potentially on the line, right? And the one guy arguing he's like an Eastern European.
Yeah.
This is right next to you. You see the Russians coming, and they've come before. You're terrified, right? So okay, I get why you care, but the breakdown of civility and screaming at each other, you're not convincing anyone, and you're not actually if you're trying to have a show where you talk about ideas, you're not talking about ideas here, because the ideas are: is the United States an imperial power? Yes or no? And then you go along with. And then if they are an imperial power, is that a good or bad thing? If it's a bad thing, do you want to get rid of them or not? And if you do get rid of them, who replaces them? Who doesn't? What do you do? Do you want China to be the next imperial power, or Russia to be the next imperial power? And I don't know how to describe this. I've been trying to think of a way to describe this for a few days now, or maybe a few weeks. There's a certain kind of person, they tend to be mostly online type people, who care way too much about facts. And it sounds bad in a way, but people, it's like, well, that's objectively wrong, or that's objectively, like, you look at Mahler, like the whole EFAP thing, right? And they talk about this movie is objectively bad because there's mistakes in it, right? Like there's a plot hole, or I really don't think plot holes matter at all to the quality of a story or a movie. They're like, look at Harry Potter. It's the most popular, or one of the most popular franchises on Earth. I think Twilight passed it, but Harry Potter, massively popular.
I don't think Twilight has had the same staying power culturally, though.
Yeah, and maybe at this point, Harry Potter's outsold it again. Yeah. But it spoke to something truer than, oh, well, there's only 200 students in Hogwarts total, or whatever. Like that's
a ridiculously small amount of students.
Yeah. That's a plot hole, but it's like, it's a throwaway line that she messed up on, right? She didn't think it through, and it doesn't actually matter to the story as a whole. You're ignoring the forest for the trees. Yeah. That's exactly what you're doing. And I think that's what people like Mahler do. They completely ignore the forest for the trees. It's like, well, this movie is objectively bad because this, and this. You can have there's a great example used by game designers all the time. When you're designing a fighting game, there's all this, like, we need balance. And then you look at the fighting game with the strongest staying power of all time, Melee. Horribly imbalanced game. The players found their own balance, not through modding it or tweaking it, but just learning the characters in and out to a degree that's unbelievable.
Yeah.
The stuff they do is, like, there's the amount of techniques in that game, it's on a whole different level. And any game might have this potential, but only Melee people have actually really dug in and done this with. But the example they give is, there is a perfectly balanced fighting game that was designed back in the mid-90s, I think it was. And it's called Karate Fighters, I think. And it's an arcade game. And you can play as one character.
Yeah, it's a head-to-head.
It's a head-to-head fight you have one character in total.
Yeah.
And it's a fighting game, right? Like it's not like there's no interactions. There's skill in the game, but you can only play as one character.
Yeah.
And they say, look, even the first Mortal Kombat, much more balanced game because everyone is just a reskin of Sub-Zero, or Scorpion maybe it was. But they do have a couple different characters with powers, and suddenly that's way more interesting. And that karate game, we do not see Karate Fighters 12 coming out with here's the one character, oh, this is going to be so great. There are games you could say that are kind of like that, like Tori Bash, where everyone does have the same options available and there is a lot of depth to it, and that there is something interesting in exploring the depth of having just everyone has the same rule set. What can you do with it? But you look at, like, StarCraft, it didn't come out with only Terrans, or Age of Empires, you don't only play as the Britons, or Smash Bros, you don't only get Mario. People love a symmetry.
Yeah, with Tori Bash, the game has such a level of complexity that there's
room for fighting styles and whatnot. But it is a much more refined game. But on the other hand, it's a far less popular game than all these other games. And
well, it's not even. There's the high level, which is pure mechanics. So this exists in a lot of games. Like pure mechanics, high level, we look at StarCraft, again, high level pure mechanics, like Zerg have their rushes or whatever. And then we go look at Age of Empires, and we could say the Italians on water reign supreme. You can't beat the Italians on water maps. And all those games, there's the objectively good thing. Like there's these hero pool in Dota. There's all these things. When I look at these games, I go, oh, Teutonic Knights look so cool. Or I play Dota and it's like, I want to play that cool looking wizard.
Yeah, and that's how everyone plays.
Yeah.
Even the pros who say, like, never play Ganondorf, he sucks. They want to play Ganondorf.
Yes.
They just can't because they'll lose. But they want to play Ganondorf.
And then there's those few that do play Ganondorf because...
And they want to play the Teutons because everyone loves a Teutonic Knight. So even the pro... But then you have the subset of humanity, or subset of the internet culture, where... it's
why would you play the Teutons? They're objectively bad.
Yeah. Or they'll say something like, this game is objectively better than this game because it has twice the content, or because the puzzles are more complex or something. Like you look at the Zelda games, like the second, Link to the Past is objectively better than the first game because its world's like 8 times as big and you have much more complex dungeons and puzzles, but it actually gets rid of a lot of the exploration and it's more technically impressive, but it doesn't necessarily do the same thing.
Well, on that, for me personally, Warhammer, I like fantasy a lot more.
Yeah.
The sci-fi in 40K and the sci-fi fantasy is cool, and there's a lot more being produced for it because it's more popular. But I like fantasy a lot more still.
A better example, actually, is the discourse around dialogue in video games, cutscenes in video games. People say, well, it's objectively part of the gameplay because of this, this, and this. And you can't just delineate the two and say, I hate cutscenes in video games because they're part of the video game. It's part of the experience. And people can't define it. They can't say exactly when does how's that, like how many stacks of sand you have to make a pile, that sort of thing. It's like, where does that start? You can't define it, therefore you're wrong and I'm right. But you have had this ongoing argument with someone talking about how I don't like cutscenes in video games, and they're saying, well, you can't define what a cutscene is versus the gameplay because the cutscene is part of the gameplay. And I said, well, you're not making choices. They say, well, you make choices in the dialogue and you choose which way the path goes. But I say, well, you're railroaded. They're like, yeah, but that's still a gameplay choice. It's a small one, but it's still there. But I know what I mean. And I think you know what I mean. And if you're ignoring that, then we're not having a proper conversation here. And maybe they don't know what I mean. Maybe they are stuck in this subjective world. And maybe there is no way to get across to them that the sum of the parts is richer than, like, the sum is richer than the whole is richer than the sum of its parts. But so people will argue about the Ukrainian war with facts. They'll say, well, factually, Putin said this, this, and this, and therefore he's wrong, or factually the Americans did this, this, and this, therefore they're wrong, or there was this phone call which proves this, or there's this whole, and these people are idiots because they're not bringing facts to the table, right? But then you look at the arguments, what you have to look at is there a Russian nationalism burning in Putin's heart where he says, this is what I need, this is what I believe in, and is there a fear burning in the Americans' heart? If they take Ukraine, then they take Poland, then they take this, then they're equal to us, then they're stronger than us? Or is there and then there's an argument as well. You can say, well, I want the Americans to crumble, right? Because I don't like their imperial empire. It's like, okay, do you want to shoot the Ukrainians yourself, or do you want to, these are people. This is...
Yeah, our dad, we were talking about this, and he said something, he just broke down crying about this, because he said, these are people's sons dying. And I think about, like, what if my sons died in this thing? Like, that's horrible. And he's, like, really, really upset about the idea of us fighting and dying in a war.
Yeah, I don't know. I was thinking about this AI videos come out of Sora videos.
I want to touch on one.
No, I'm talking about the Ukrainian stuff still. Okay. But these AI videos have come out about with the Sora AI, and they are so realistic you basically can't trust videos you see anymore.
Yeah.
And that led me to thinking, if you can't trust videos you see, and you can't trust pictures, and you can't trust news, how do you believe anything you see on the news? And the answer is you can't. And therefore, the only things you can believe are the things you see yourself, or that a trusted person who talks to you about, right? And what that means is maybe for the first time since the telegram was invented, we'll stop caring about stuff on the other side of the world. Because another part of this whole argument about something like the Ukraine, that's kind of strange, is you can't care about the world, right? Yeah. And it gets, I don't know, it's a bit far afield sometimes. I don't know, but then it always affects you in these little ways. So and you wanted to add more, sorry.
Yeah, it's, because everyone who's talked about this that I've listened to is they didn't get it, I don't think. Or they didn't interpret the way I interpret it. I want the confirmation, just to say this point, is in Putin's interview with Tucker Carlson, where he said, all right, I'll just take 30 seconds. And then he spent half an hour explaining the history. And there's jokes about everything. What no one understood, what he was saying, is this land is Russia. It has always been Russian. People have tried to take it apart before. They've tried to take it from us before, divide us. That does not matter. It will be Russian again. His history lesson was saying that this is Russia.
Well, I think some of the people mocking it were also pointing out, though, that, okay, then you should give Russia to Mongolia, or you should give...
Well, here, that mocking's also wrong, because what he was saying with that, and is these people are Russian. It's not the land.
Yeah.
It's the people. This place is Russia. And its history isn't so much like giving the Scots, like the English and the Scottish, like give it back to the Scottish. But there's sort of like there's a history, there's a thing. That area is Russia. these are the Rus people.
Okay, how about this? What if the UK attacked the United States and said, well, these are British. These are British people. These are the same people. These are... Because I think that's...
I'm not saying it's a justification.
Yeah. It doesn't have to be a good one. It's just they're missing the point.
They're missing the point of what Putin was explaining. It's like, there is a history here longer than you can comprehend. And the people here that runs deeper than your people have run.
I think I've seen people that have acknowledged that but still think it's a bad argument.
Yeah.
But I haven't watched the Putin interview. And I haven't watched the follow-up interview he did with some Russian news organizations. So... maybe I'll just leave it there. If you have more you want to add, go ahead. But
I just wanted to point that out on that interview. It seems like a lot of people missed what he was saying. And it doesn't mean it took 30 minutes for him to say that. It doesn't mean he said as succinctly as he could have. It doesn't mean that it's the right reason for it. But the point is, he was getting across to American, basically. He's explaining to Americans something that all Russian people knew. Russians say this is kind of boring what he said, which is, this is our land.
Yeah. Well, I think actually one of the big things... Well, you're making two opposite points. They're not actually opposite, but the way you stated them to the fact seeker were exact opposites. You said it's not about the land, it's about the people. Then the next point you said was this is our land. Yeah. So I think what you're getting at is there is a soul of the soul of Kiev is the soul of Russia, because Kiev was the founding point of the Rus people. That was the first Rus city, and the Rus are an ancient people, go back potentially to the Vikings and potentially to the Slavs. And we don't really know where they came from, but they are this ancient people, and Kiev was sort of their heartland. And then Russia no longer has that heart. It would be more equivalent if the UK lost London to the United States in the War of Liberation, or whatever they call it.
Yeah,
War of Succession, maybe.
I think it's the American Revolution.
Yeah, in the American Revolution, yeah. When the War of the Upstarts, whatever it was. If during the American Revolution, they'd also taken London with them, and then today the UK wanted London back. It's almost more like that. It's like, this is our heartland that we no longer have. It's not just like if Russia was trying to take Chechnya, or not Chechnya. Is it called Chechnya? What's the country near Azerbaijan called?
I don't know.
They did take it. It's near Georgia as well. When they took Georgia, or when they took Chechnya. See, what the Czech Republic wants everyone to call them like Chechnya or something, and so I get them confused now. But when they took those countries, that was much more of an aggressive maneuver in a lot of ways. But with Ukraine, you can definitely see that these are Russians. These are like Georgians. They are very Russian, but they are also their own country. Not that they still aren't their own country, because Russia's a federation, but... And I don't quite know... It seems to me weird that a federation is a conquering nation, because...
We're going to federate you?
Yeah, like, isn't that just an empire? Like, why are they a federation? Or maybe it's just they call themselves a federation?
Yeah, optics.
Yeah, because I would think a federation is when a bunch of countries get together and say, hey, let's be on the same team. Although that said, the United States is a federation. Yeah. Well, they're a federation, right? Yeah. Like they're a republic, but that's same online people to say, well, the United States isn't a democracy, it's a republic. It's like, yes, but it's a democracy. They vote. There's a word people use to mean something that isn't maybe the technical definition, and maybe there's a nuance in between, but they are a democracy. And unless that is key to the argument, even if it's key to the argument, what we're going to do is agree on a term for each of those terms, and then we'll keep talking about the important stuff rather than saying, well, actually, it's a republic, therefore your argument falls apart. It's like, okay, just use my definition of democracy, meaning republic, and then we'll work from there. Or say, okay, stop, let's define these terms and then move on. We don't have to agree to them at all times, but during this conversation, let's have the same definition for these words. But, so the United States, I think, is technically a federation, but when the South succeeded, they were attacked by the North and reconquered.
Yeah, so they were refederated.
So that's an empire too, right? Like, yeah. Because in a federation, you think, okay, the deal's over, we're done, bye, see you. Like in Canada, when Quebec voted to leave, theoretically, we would have let them. We wouldn't have conquered them after they left.
No.
I mean, theoretically, maybe we would have conquered them.
No.
But, because Canada, I don't know if Canada has a federal government, but I don't know if we're a federation because we're so, like, interlinked. But on the other hand, our provinces are like the Yukon in particular, you look at history books and they will talk about the Yukon. Like it's always sort of been part of Canada, but it's always been referred to as its own thing.
Yeah.
And Quebec is the same way, and Newfoundland is the same way. Newfoundland was its own country before it joined Canada.
Yeah, it was for a long time too.
Yeah, it was only recently it joined Canada,
Yeah.
like in the last, I don't know, 50 or 60 or 70 years, something in there. And places like Alberta have their own identity, and people know about like and the United States. All the states are basically little countries.
Yeah. Well, the land is so big.
Yeah, you kind of have to do it that way,
Like
I guess.
the environment will shape the culture differently. Like,
But
just purely by being in a cold, dry wasteland in valleys, you're going to be different than people on a cold, wet, rocky hill land.
here's a this is more of a geopolitical theorizing question than
Statement, fact.
or even like anything serious, right? But or trying to make a point, because I don't know if there is a point here. But Russia, okay, do you think? Let's say Russia could win any war they wanted, right? Not necessarily easily, but they would win.
Yeah.
So let's say they win the Ukrainian war, they get what they want. What do you think that is? I think it'd probably be all of Ukraine, but maybe they only take half. I don't know. And then maybe they want Estonia and Latvia and Lithuania. That kind of makes sense to me, I think.
Yeah.
Maybe they want Romania and those, like the Slavic countries. They want all of the...
I don't know if they'd want the Slavs.
Because Russians are like potentially Slavic descended, right?
Yeah.
So they're kind of Russian.
But again, I don't know if they'd want the Slavs just because you'd have to then have Slavs under your control. And it's not a diss to the Slavs, but if the Slavs aren't managing themselves, like if it's a conquering nation trying to control Slavs, the conquering nations basically has this dog biting their ankle for the rest of their governments.
Well, I mean, Yugoslavia didn't do well either.
Yeah.
And that was all Slavs.
Well, exactly, but they only have the Slavs to blame, and then new Slavs can show up and take over. But if you're like a power trying to control the Slavs, then you have to deal with them instead of the Slavs having to deal
And
with
then
them.
Yugoslavia broke apart, and then Serbia has now broken apart into Kosovo and Serbia.
Yeah.
So it keeps breaking down.
Yeah, so imagine trying to manage that yourself.
Yeah. But, Russians are sort of Slavs. And then let's go over to...
Like Mongolia, China.
Well, Mongolia, sure. And then let's go down to, like, Armenia, that region anyways. Like Turkey.
There's areas of northern China as well.
Yeah, sort of Russian-ish lands, right?
Yeah.
Alaska? Maybe they take Alaska.
Well, there's that song I showed you where the guy says we'll get it all back. And it says from... It's like the border of the UK. Like it's like from Poland to Alaska. It's like this spread out map.
Yeah, and so Poland, they take half of Poland that they wanted from the Germans.
Finland.
They take Finland. They take Sweden, maybe.
I don't know if they'd want the Scandies as much.
Well,
Did they try to take over Scandinavia?
yes, they.
Well, besides Finland.
Like
Did they go after Norway and...
not Norway so much, but they've been in a lot of wars with Sweden. But I think Sweden might have been the aggressor. No. When Corollas Rex took over, they were attacked by Russia.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Russia wanted to conquer them then.
Well, that's because he was an illegitimate ruler. And
No, because
everyone dies.
he was young. They thought he was.
That's
weak.
what I meant by like he was weak. Sorry, not
Yeah,
illegitimate.
he was legitimate. He was just weak. He was this 15-year-old with a small army, and there was like a coalition of like 4 countries against him. So they're like easy pickings. And you don't just attack easy pickings unless you want to keep them, right? So, so I think Russia would want Sweden. So my question is, okay, they take all those, right?
Sorry, I said 4-country coalition to take easy pickings and
They lost, yeah.
But just even, this is easy pickings. Let's gang up on him.
So Russia gets all those lands. The question then is, do they take Norway? Do they take Japan?
Parts of Canada.
Do they take Canada? Do they take Vietnam? Do they take Cambodia and Laos? Do they take Africa? Do they take all of Turkey? Do they take the Arab Emirates? Because that doesn't feel right to me.
No.
So the Soviet Union, they wanted a chain reaction of revolutions around the world. They wanted, because it was the Soviets is workers, right? It was the workers' union. They wanted all the workers of the world to unite. So the Soviet Union is meant to be this chain reaction. But the Russian Federation's claims seem to be more historical in nature, a sort of mythological spirit of Russia. And like, you know, Germany did the same thing, World War II, where they didn't want to conquer the UK. They wanted to conquer France and Germany and Austria, and
They sent deals to the UK saying,
Yeah.
let us have these.
yeah, because it's like, these are Germans. We want, and
Yeah.
and you're a great empire. We want to be a great empire.
Yeah.
In Mein Kampf, Hitler talks about his admiration for the British, and he loves their democratic system, and he thinks very highly of it in their ancient history. I think a lot of, not just dictators, I think a lot of people have a deep respect for the deep history of their nation.
Yeah.
And that's another question is, do Americans have that same respect? Because it would be hard to, because they cut themselves off from the crown.
Yeah.
Now, Canadians and New Zealanders and Australians, we can have that depth to a degree because we can still trace our country's lineage back to the crown, and we can say the crown is ancient. But the British said, no, we don't believe in this. You actually, the Americans.
Yeah.
I guess they were British at one point. But you actually see this a lot with Americans, where any hint of aristocracy or nobility or kingship, their hackles go up and they're, this is awful, this is bad, this is terrible. And they don't recognize the value in the systems, like how most French nobles, for example, which is kind of crazy because of the French Revolution, but most French nobles earn their position. They did something, or their parents did something. They either gave a lot of money to the state, or they were a great leader in a war, or they rendered some great service to the king. There's the noblesse d'épée and the noblesse de whatever. They earn them.
Yeah.
And that's, if you go way back in any country's history, that's probably where all the nobility came from. But France had a system long into their history for doing that. It was like, oh yeah, hey, you're a noble now because you did this great service. And, well, in the UK, they still do that.
House of Lords.
Cameron, what's his name? David Cameron. He became a lord recently to get around a rule in the government. But they made him, because how's that work? If you served in Parliament, you're not allowed to re-enter Parliament.
No.
Unless you're a lord. And so they're like, well, you're a lord now.
Yeah.
And so they let Lord Cameron into the British Parliament. And I don't even, I never thought he was that well liked, so I'm surprised they did it for him. But I guess he's a good diplomat or something, because that's what he is now. So I guess they needed him as a diplomat.
Or political favor exchange, backroom deals.
I've seen videos of him in the House of Commons, like that British
Fist fight arena.
I don't know what, Monty Python sketch. Like it's not just that. It's the speakers on the floor are like comedians with a crowd, working a crowd, and you get people clapping and laughing, and they do David Cameron was amazing at that. Yeah. He had great posture in it. He had this sort of insolent slouch where he would just make fun of all the opposition and everyone would laugh. Even his opponents would laugh, and he was great at it. So he's a very charismatic guy.
He also, despite a lot of things that I can disagree with him, he stood by a principle which I can really agree with, which is he said, all right, we want to leave the EU. Yeah. We have this thing. I don't want to, but we're going to let the people vote on it. And when it didn't go his way, he's like, well, I'm not leading anymore. I stepped down.
So I guess the other thing is, right,
and so that's a bit of a principled fellow in that stand.
Yeah, and the other thing about him is, I don't know what the lifespan of a pig is, but at this point, they're probably not voting against him anymore. So that's probably why his popularity's gone up.
You do all of these things in your life.
But you
fuck one pig and that's all you're known for. Oh, it's a big fucker.
See that bridge? I built that bridge. Yeah, with my own hands. And the church? Yeah, I put that up. Do they call me the builder? No. Rescued a kid from drowning. Do they call me the rescuer? No.
There's just one goat, one time, lonely evening.
Yeah. Well, it was like a hazing ritual for his fraternity, and it's only rumored, I think, as well. But,
yeah, but the joke is the goat.
Yeah. No, but with David Cameron, it's funny that it was like, it's this rumor of a hazing ritual at his university, but it's like, that's him. He's the guy. And it was actually, it's like a pig's head you'd stick. Anyway.
The British hazing things are...
Brits are gross.
Yeah.
A proud ancient history of disgusting people. They've got great philosophies and everything else is terrible. Their manners and their way of behaving and their everything's... But it could be that very sort of bumbly, weird thing that led to their philosophies. But on the other hand, if the Brits are such terrible people, are their philosophies actually good, or is it just because they conquered the world that their philosophies are
No, we think we talked about this last time.
Yeah, but even more so now that I'm thinking about it, like, do you want to be taking on the philosophy of the people that invented fagging and the people
Soggy cracker
and the people that invented
dogging?
like, oh, what's that thing called where they have so many horrible traditions? There's one where,
Well, I think
like having sex in like bush and hedgerows.
That's dogging.
That's dog. Okay, yeah, and
What I was going to say on that is your country is so old, and your people are so old, and it hasn't changed in 800 years. I'm actually going to say this: Britain
they go a little crazy.
hasn't changed in 800 years, and so like the amount of power that the council has, like the town council, like they're little tyrants. The town council or the parish council or whatever, like the little councils. But then you think about it, it's like, why do they have all these powers and all these weird rules? Like, what sort of conceited weird system would cause this?
So we were talking about the prime minister before. Like, when did that come into position? Was that after the Magna Carta? Was that?
Yeah.
So it was way after the Magna Carta came in.
Yeah.
But who was the first British prime minister is an interesting question because there wasn't one. It was a position that just sort of happened. So basically, the king, as his duties grew, had and as he had to have more representatives from the people, had a council of ministers.
Yeah.
And more and more ministers, more and more consolidated power. So you have your minister of finance and your minister of housing and whatever, all your ministers. And eventually you had so many ministers, they're like, okay, we need someone to just lead the ministers. And it was sort of just, nobody voted for him. It was just everyone was, one day it turned out everyone, you know how in any group there's a person that sort of makes the decisions more often than not? There's a guy that did the decisions more often than not. And I don't know if he was the first guy, but the first one they recognized as, hey, this guy's the first minister, the prime minister, like the guy that's...
Yeah, the prime.
Yeah. Guy, Walpole, maybe? It was the 1700s. And, but it wasn't a post. It was just...
Coalesced.
Yeah, but he didn't have the title of prime minister either. It was just, oh yeah, you need something done, you talk to him, because he knows what's going on. And then it just became this sort of traditional thing of like, he stepped down and it's like, okay, who's going to, it was really nice when we had someone leading the council. You want to do it? Yeah, okay. It was this traditional thing. And that's, I don't know, but I'm guessing that's why we don't vote for our prime minister still.
Yeah.
And I bet the British don't vote for their prime minister either. But I don't know.
You vote for your council.
You vote for your representative to the parliament.
You vote for your minister.
Or your member of parliament,
yeah. Member of parliament. And then they are part of a party. And
that party elects a leader, yeah.
Yeah, so what's interesting, actually, it's never happened in Canada. I think, and...
It almost happened, though, with Trudeau, right? If you're talking about what if the leader of the party doesn't have a seat? Or
it's not that it doesn't have a seat, no. I don't know of any cases, but in Canada, we can have all these parties. And let's say next election goes through. And so all these different parties get elected. And let's just say that the Conservatives have like a ton of seats.
Yeah.
And they have their party leader. We could get Jagmeet Singh as the leader.
Oh, if the Conservatives choose to make him the leader?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think can make anyone a leader. However, if...
They might have to be a member of parliament.
Well, that's what I'm saying. You have to have a seat.
Yeah.
So they have the seat, then they're a minister, and then you can vote them to be the prime minister in Canada. However, if that were to happen, then the Conservative Party's whip would basically kick all those people out.
Yeah.
And so that's why it doesn't happen. So those people get kicked out and become independent. And that's the truth with the UK as well, of you have all these people, and then if someone wants to say, no, I disagree, they'll get kicked out and no longer have that party support.
And I believe in Canada as well, parties are not part of the government.
No.
They are independent organizations.
They're independent organizations that have a huge amount of restrictions on them.
But they're not entities. Like, no. They're clubs more than...
Yes.
Like in the United States, you actually register as a Republican, or you register as a Democrat, and you can vote for who their leader will be of their party, and then that person says, I'm going to run for president.
Yeah. And
that's why they have the two different votes.
Yeah.
But in Canada, the parties are kind of...
You buy a membership, and then you can vote for the leader.
But that's extra. That's outside of the governmental workings. Whereas in the United States... The Republicans are actually part of the...
I think that's more unique to the United States because it's the same thing with the UK, is they're actually outside of it.
Well, yeah, the United States was constructed, whereas
Yeah.
British is just tradition upon tradition upon tradition.
Yeah, I'm saying like, the United States might be the odd one out here of having them apart, like the
Right. You mean like in the world even?
yeah, the rhinos and the donkeys.
Yeah, because they are actually like I think to be able to be on the ballot for something in the States, you actually have to get 5% of the popular vote at some like so the libertarians, for example, can't be an official party that gets certain benefits.
They can't try to have senators or.
I can't remember what it is, but they can't get some sort of special benefit until they get 5% of the popular
That's
vote.
actually really weird because United States, like, there's always these independents who try to become president because you actually vote for president. But are there like independent senators and independent? What's this? The Senate and the House.
I don't know what they have.
But they have the three governments.
Yeah, Congress.
Yeah, Congress. Like independent congressmen.
I think they do have independence. We have independent like members of parliament.
I know we have, but I'm talking about the states. I don't know if they had independent.
Yeah. We can also have independent like leaders of the province and whatnot.
Yeah.
I don't think we do, but
we can have an independent prime minister.
Yeah, but what we could do here is Trudeau tomorrow could say, "I'm joining the Conservatives," and I don't think that would cause any sort of issue. Whereas I'm pretty sure Biden isn't allowed to be a Republican because he's not part of that party. Like,
okay.
But I think like because he registered as a Democrat, like he could next time round he could say I'm a Republican. But I think in Canada it's a club affiliation, whereas in the States it's actually a legal institution. But the Prime Minister just sort of arose, which I think
that's very British.
It's kind of funny. So yeah, going to. I kind of convinced myself in a different way, actually, because I was going to say, so it doesn't seem like Putin is, even if you look at him as worse as possible, he isn't trying to conquer the world, he's trying to take back Russian land. But then, on the other hand, that's what Hitler was trying to do, and that's what, Napoleon was actually trying to conquer land, I think.
Yeah.
But it does make you I think Napoleon was trying to secure France, partly, too. But,
well, the Romans were trying to secure their border.
Yeah, but the Romans were going and conquering for sure.
That is to secure their border.
Yeah. So would Russia continue to secure its border? I
don't think so.
Or would it say, look, we just want Russia to be Russia?
I think part of it is Russia to be Russia. The world is sort of, I don't know how long it can last. That's the thing. Because we think about the world as a very stable, these are the borders, this is the way things are right now. And it's been that way for about 60 years. And it's like, okay, there's troubles in the Middle East. That's a statement. Troubles in the Middle East. And their borders are a bit funky. And Russia does some things, but that's near the Russian countries.
Like they took Georgia and they took Crimea.
That's what I'm saying. Like Russia does things, but they're near the Russia. And it's always been a bit of uproar. And China does things, but that's always in Asia. But with Russia going towards Ukraine, that's closer to Western Europe.
Yeah.
And there's not been any movement in Western Europe. Western Europe's been kind of locked since World War II. There hasn't been conflict because there's the European Union. We're all allies. We're not fighting
There has
anymore.
been, but not in Europe. Like it's been in Africa and stuff. If you count that as part of the country, right? Like France has lost land and Belgium has lost like Rwanda and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's this sort of thing that there hasn't been war for a very long time of conquest. It's kind of, you're playing Civilization. And you get to about the modern era, and if no one's really warmongering everywhere because everyone's about equal power, people have nukes, you're playing without a group of psychos, so they're just not going to randomly nuke each other. And so the borders kind of get locked at a certain point and stop moving. But that might not stay the case. But nukes really discourage that. They really, really discourage that.
I think it's nukes and it's also logistics. Because if you have, you go back to the Roman times, let's say, and you have a tribal dispute between some Celts and some other Celts, you have some like Scottish
Highlanders and Lowlanders.
Yeah, and they fight. They take some territory, and that's that, right? A Roman isn't going to pick a side because it would take them like 4 months to get up there.
Yeah.
Or longer. And what's going on in India or North America or Central or South America, the Romans aren't going to care in the slightest. It's like that. Who knows what's going on over there? I have no clue. But nowadays you can have a war in the Ukraine on the opposite side of the world, basically, and the United States can say, "I have an opinion on that, and I'm going to do something about that."
Well, even that's the thing. If you think about it,
because the world's smaller.
China tried to take Taiwan,
Taiwan.
not Taiwan. The horrible swamp country that no one can take.
Vietnam?
Yeah, Vietnam.
Well, it's more jungle, but
Yeah, jungle, sorry.
yeah, jungle and caves.
Yeah, they tried to take Vietnam.
Yeah.
And America
Afghanistan. Well, Afghanistan's good.
But America just basically went zoom into there and fought the Chinese.
Yeah. And lost, but they tried. Yeah.
Yeah, and same with Korea. The allies of Korea zoomed in there and created that border instead of... there's a video, if it shows Korea, and it shows the two powers, so the divide of South and North Korea. And North Korea basically has complete control in this map. And there's 3 cities, and the Americans get in there and start pushing back, and then the British come in there, and the Canadians come in there, and they push it all the way back, but it was basically controlled by the North.
Probably looks a lot better if you look at it after the South was losing, because the border we have today is basically the border we had before the Korean War.
Yeah.
Because they split the country, and then they had the war, and then during the war, they basically said, okay, well, neither of us can get past the border.
Yeah.
And so it didn't really do anything in the end. But yeah, the Americans had a huge impact on it.
Yeah.
And
even China attacking Japan, you have America moves in instantly.
But I guess what I'm getting at is, even if all you do is take back Russian lands or take back British lands or whatever it might be, doesn't make you a good person. Well, the question is...
Well, casus belli is...
Yeah, you can have a reason to do it, but it's still... You're still a tyrant, right?
Yeah.
But the question is, look, when you're playing Europa Universalis,
yeah,
and you conquer a country, and you kill all the people through looting and pillaging, the place does produce less resources, right? And it's annoying. And then they recover. And you have your border expanded, and you're safer, you're more secure, you have more power, whatever it might be. The entity... You have weakened your country and their country, and your lands are weak. But it's kind of like if you get in a fight and you have bruises on you, right? And it's like, okay, the bruises are an injury, but those will heal, and I'm stronger for it.
Yeah.
The entities that live or die are countries. If Germany gets wiped out, then there's a loss. A player has been kicked out of the game. But there's no tragedy on your manpower has dropped by 4,000 soldiers. That's not the tragedy. And I wonder if you become a leader for long enough, if you start seeing the world, the personifications are the countries, not the people. And also, if you talk about geopolitics, right? I'm not even saying it's a bad thing or disconnect. It's more like there are different levels of analysis. There is I don't want my Ukrainian friend to get shot. I don't want my Russian friend to get shot. I don't want my Ukrainian and Russian friend to be shooting each other.
Yeah.
And then there's the level of, this is a thumb wrestling match between the United States and Russia in Ukraine. And you have your opinions on that. I want the United States to be taught a lesson and stop being so imperialistic, or I want to feel safe from Russia and for them to never have power again, or I want to respect freedom and uphold it with the United States. And you don't care about the Russians that are dying, or you don't care about the Ukrainians that are dying. There's these levels of analysis. And as we were talking about before, where you're saying, like, oh, the soldiers dying, that's sad, and these are people. That is a level of analysis, but it's not the only level of analysis. No. Doesn't mean it's not important. No. But I think what happens with the arguments between people, a lot of the time, is that the levels of analysis they're talking at are different.
Yeah, well, they're different, but also one of the things that happens with the levels of analysis is you are at a bigger scale level analysis, yes, like the country level. And then someone will attack you with a lower scale analysis of, don't you care about these people dying? How are you so inhuman talking about the higher scale when there's a lower scale?
Yeah, and don't you see that there are people suffering? But then you say, okay, we'll have no wars. Is that what you want? And you're like, well, yeah, obviously I don't want any wars, because what war was it good for? Nothing, right? And then
a Holocaust happens,
and you say, can we intervene? It's like, no, that's not our place. It's their culture. It's their, like, you have the Maori. It's their culture to go and eat other nations. Like, literally. Yeah. They go and cannibalize other people, right? That's what they used to do. Like, the Moriari were, like, genocided, or nearly so. And then the British came along and said, hey, no. And now the Maori are this fun, like, football nation.
Yeah.
Rugby players.
Yeah, same with the British of the husband died and so the bride is
Yeah,
burned.
in India. Yeah.
And that's your tradition.
And-
Our tradition is to shoot people who burn their wives.
It's to burn people who burn their wives. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And
We'll respect your tradition, but we'll also respect ours.
now the way I said that, it just basically painted the Maori as savages, which is kind of harsh, I think. But the old Maori culture had many savage aspects to it. Or it had very un-British aspects to it.
Yes.
And we think the world's better for it being more British. Now, you might disagree, and maybe, the thing about history is it's always wrong. Like, the entire peoples could have been, oh yeah, there was this one group of wacko mercenaries that went and
8 people.
and ate like half a person
Yeah.
one time. And that was the time the British ran into the Maori for the first time, and it stuck in their head. Like, so the word cannibal, it comes from like a tribe in North America, like they were called the cannibals or something, and they were like a Native American tribe that what's his name, Christopher Columbus was warned about. He was friends with a different tribe, and they were like, oh yeah, stay away from the cannibals, they eat people. And it's like, do they, or is that what they say?
Well, if you go back to the 1700s, maybe a little 1600s, and you talk to the Inuit about the Dene.
And Dene called them the Eskimos. They're like,
Yeah.
oh, there's the eaters of raw flesh over there. And
Yeah, but then you talk to the Dene about the Eskimos, or the Eskimos about the Dene. They hated each other.
Yeah.
And they had so many horrible things to say about each other.
Well, yeah, like the Dene called the Inuit Eskimos.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was an insult. Yeah, and
I'm saying it went both ways.
yeah, but a lot of Dan Carlin and one of his recent shows was a few months ago, The Twilight of the Aesir Part 2, I think it was. Or no, it was an interview he did maybe it was a few years ago. But he was asked by some historians, do you believe the history books? Or like, how much credence do you give them? And he said, well, yeah, you have to believe them. Like, because otherwise you have nothing.
Yeah.
And it's kind of this funny thing of like, of course we know they're wrong, but
It's all we have to go with.
we have to take them as fact, because what else are you going to do?
Yeah, there's you look at the facts that are given of what is written, and you look at human nature. And
you say, this is true as far as we know, but of course you question everything.
Yeah.
And actually, one thing that in that same interview they talked about was really interesting was Dan Carlin was talking about, he thinks a lot of social upheaval type things, like, oh, all your heroes are actually slavers and racists and bad people, and Churchill was actually this horrible person, and Jefferson had slaves, and all these horrible things, right? He said he thinks that what's going on there, this dissolution of heroes and, tearing down statues of Lee and whatnot, is academic discourse leaking out into the wider world. Because if two historians are talking about Churchill and they say, man, that guy, he did some bad stuff, like he was whatever, I don't know what the accusations against him are, but let's say he was this horrible racist, right?
yeah.
It's like, yeah, man, he was a racist. Yeah, he had this and this and this. And the academic historians will have this conversation. But underlying that conversation is, man, this hero was racist. Like, they are not saying he wasn't a hero.
Yeah.
Because historians understand everyone's complicated. And there's depth and nuance to everyone. But what happens is this leaks out and people go, he was terrible, tear down all your heroes. You can't have heroes.
He bummed a pig.
Yeah. Well, no, he was sort of, I don't want to get into the logistics, but
But what I'm saying is the one thing
Yeah.
comes out and people grab onto that.
yeah.
And it's even funner to have a hero, or it's not funner, it's more alluring
Yeah.
to have a hero that you can then denigrate.
Yeah, you can tear down for your own vindication. Yeah. And if you study history more, or you listen to history more, you pay attention to it, let's say, you realize that people are very, very complicated, and that there are no people that come out smelling like roses.
No.
And so people say, well, was Christopher Columbus actually this horrible person? Or he wasn't as bad as we thought. He had all these redeeming qualities. Those all can be true. He doesn't have to be a saint or a sinner. He can be human.
Well, yeah, be human. It goes further back than history in some ways to the Bible, which is a history, so to say. But it's a very old history in some sense. It's a very long kept record. And I express this shock. Like, the original people of the Abrahamic faith, like even Abraham and like his sons, they're all awful people. But there's nuance. There's more than just them being awful. There's some good things they do. There's some bad thing. There's a story. They are people. They are human.
A lot of, you see this a lot with, like, being on time is white supremacy, right? You've heard that, right?
Yeah.
And people laugh at it. And what happened there, I think, is the same thing, where there is actually a very interesting, deep academic discussion that some pseudo-intellectual progressive SJW heard. And they completely stripped out all the nuance and all the interesting parts. And they found a new tool to say, look, some smart people had this thing where they said that white people are racist. And so we're going to use this, right? But what the conversation there is that the Protestants mandated clocks in every town to synchronize so that they were all the same, regardless of whether it made sense or not, right? Because the sun exists, and making your clock set to the sun makes way more sense. And so being on time is this notion of I own you and I own your time and I can control you and you have to work when I say you work. And it makes society run way smoother, and that's how the British conquered the world, because of their clocks, probably, to some, small degree there. But it's not the only way of living.
It's a boring description of take over the world. Our clocks ran on time, and thus we won.
No, they're synchronized. It's not that they're accurate, it's that they're synchronized.
I guess.
But synchronized clocks is only one way of living, because you can probably be a lot healthier. And the fact that people talk about, I hate alarm clocks, I hate mornings, I hate, I'm an early riser, I'm a late riser. That discussion, if you're a farmer without a clock, that discussion goes away and things happen when they happen.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of benefits to that. It makes your society maybe as a whole weaker, but it makes your life richer in a lot of ways, potentially. Some people, they need more structure. And some people, they prefer, okay, I'm going to give up the ability to go to bed half an hour earlier if I can coordinate with a friend that's 2 towns over. Yeah. But if you live, if there's some scary stats on time zones. People that live on the western side of a time zone live less. Like, they live shorter lives, because that means that they're getting up earlier in the morning and they're going to bed earlier, and so
they're not living in the daylight hours as much.
Yeah, so it's like it's really dark in the morning, and then they get a bit more light at night, but then they go to bed sometimes during the light if it's summer, and so they lose that, and so they have more heart attacks, more stress, more. Maybe it's just unhealthy people congregate to the western side of time zone for some reason, but. Because we can't say anything's definitive, but they do live less time. And if you live in a place that uses double permanent daylight savings in order to synchronize with other parts of the world, and you're already on the western side of your time zone, and so you're like 2.5 hours off of sync, it gets ridiculous.
Yeah.
And you look at a country like China, and they said China has one time zone.
Really?
Yeah. But I think they do it in a good way. They don't say everyone gets up at 7 and everyone goes to bed at 12. They say we have one time zone, but people on the western side of the time zone get up at 3 in the afternoon and they go to bed at
Okay.
So it's basically back to the system of unsynchronized clocks.
Yeah.
Except it's just, now that seems hard to get used to, just in you travel from one side of China to the other, and then you're like, is it bedtime? Oh yeah, of course, it's 2:45 in the afternoon. It's bedtime. China's not big enough for it to be a huge problem, but
I have a solution to this problem. Stay close to the center of the Earth. Yeah. The equator.
Yeah.
Wake up when the sun's up and go to bed when the sun goes down.
Yeah, exactly. Or just center around high noon.
Yeah.
And say this is lunchtime.
Yeah.
This is high noon. Or not.
Centering around high noon makes a little more sense.
This is 12 o'clock.
Because that lets you go other places.
But so that is where the being on time is white supremacy. There's actually an interesting discussion there. You can talk about the benefits and the disadvantages and the history of it, and it was the Protestants, and the Protestants were white, and it was a British thing that spread everywhere, but it becomes super reductive and a wasted argument, and so you have the same thing with Washington was actually racist, or Lincoln was actually racist, or Jefferson owned slaves.
Making something one-dimensional.
Yeah, but what's happening is the academic discussions are being heard by those midwits.
Yeah.
Right? Like you have it we talked did we talk about the meme last episode?
Yeah, the bell curve.
Where you have the morons, and they're like, man, George Washington was a hero. And then you have the smart people, and they're like, man, George Washington was a hero. And then you have the midwits that are like, well, actually there was all this and that, and he was a terrible person. But what happens is there's a recognition of, and I think, this this might be taking an idea too far, right? But university is pretty easy to graduate from if you have an above average intelligence at this point, I think is fair to say. Like if you have an IQ over 100, you can graduate from university, I think. Not everyone, there's more than IQ that goes into it. Obviously, there's willpower, there's temperament, but I think a lot more people are graduating from university.
Yeah.
Maybe people are getting smarter. I think that's probably part of it. But I think there's also a lot more degrees which allow you to choose the ones that work for you. And yeah, temperament, like I dropped out. I don't have what it takes, obviously. So you can say that's intelligence. You can say that's something else. But there is another. There is.
No, you're just an idiot.
Well, maybe I am, but I'm not saying that it. What I'm trying to get at is there is an achievement to graduating university even now. Like it's impressive that you made it. I couldn't do it. You did it. Good job, right?
Yeah.
That's impressive. But I think there's also a risk of and it's not just IQ. I think it's reductive to bring it down to IQ. But in broad strokes, your 100 IQ to 120 IQ people, let's say, going through university, there's a danger there where they understand the ideas, but not enough to understand the foundation they're built upon. And so they start bringing out this stuff into the world, like being on time is white supremacy.
Well, it's the same concern with the mysteries.
Yeah.
They were secretive. They chose who learned because they don't want anyone to have that knowledge.
Because a little knowledge is a dangerous thing, yeah.
Yeah. And it goes to meditation. There's disagreements. So there was some monks who, like, everyone should meditate. There's a radical monk I learned about recently who wanted the whole world to meditate. He thought if everyone meditated, the world would be a much better place. But there's other monks like, no, only monks should meditate. This is a incredibly intense activity that you have to be the right kind of person to do. You have to sacrifice everything you have and become a monk, and then you should meditate. And if you're not doing that, then sure, you can sit and enjoy some tea, but you shouldn't be meditating for 8 hours and destroy your brain.
I was also thinking with meditation, it's one of those word things, I think, where the definition that each person is using matters, because I think when a lot of people say meditate, they mean contemplate.
Yeah.
Like
that's why I said you can sit and have your tea.
Or you can sit and think about your day, think about, just, experience your life. Just sit down and be like, I'm going to just feel all my feelings and, go through my day, reflect on something, contemplate it. Meditation is about shutting down your thoughts. It's about removing thoughts from your mind. That is a different experience than when someone says, I'm going to meditate on that, you can't. That's contemplation. But you can still use the word meditate because that's how language works. It's just we have to be clear on which definition we're using when we're... Yeah. And So I wonder how much... when people say meditation is really good in psychology, for example, circles, I wonder what the definition of meditation is. Yeah. I think that would be...
Well, even that's a little bit of knowledge getting out of, you should meditate. Yeah. What do you mean by meditate?
The study says you should meditate. It's like, okay, what were they testing? Yeah. What were they telling the people to do? Yeah.
Alan Watt meditation or radical Buddhist monk meditation.
Yeah. And maybe those are the same. Maybe, he said he was having fun, which seems in some ways the opposite of what the Buddhists want, because the Buddhists believe Earth was sort of a prison that you're trying to escape.
I think, that'd be weird to say, I think a lot of people who are Buddhists in the West and I'm following the...
They're Alan Wattists.
Yes, they actually are. I think they're Alan Wattists. And I don't think that's a bad thing to be Alan Wattist.
No, I think he had some really great stuff he would talk about and do. But it's different from a lot of Buddhism.
It's very different. The closest thing to that would be Zen Shintoists is what a lot of people who say they're Buddhist. Because if you go to actual Buddhism, like Chinese or Indian Buddhism, it's whoa. Yeah. But while a lot of people is more closer to Zen, but not quite, because Zen's really weird. And so it's closer to be Zen Shintoism. And was that philosopher in China named, the very famous one?
Confucius?
Yeah, and Confucius.
Yeah, Confucianism.
Yeah, that's what their Buddhism is closer. It's Confucianism or Shinto Zen.
I mean, the sort of pure Siddhartha, original Indian Buddhism. Yeah, it's very much life is suffering. The world is a trap of pleasures. You need to leave everything behind to achieve enlightenment. But then, I don't know what happened in India, but you get to Yeah, that's good, Siddhartha. But
He
what
had
if
the elephant head?
what if there's like a dude with an elephant head and he had like 8 arms?
And another dude with like 20 heads, and they all breathe fire.
I was trying to talk about suffering here, and then like there's like this dude. He's like the creator god, and he like gets torn into 497 pieces, and each of those pieces is this evil being. And
Well, probably what it is.
then there's this dude with an arrow, and the arrow can destroy anything.
Probably what it is Siddhartha's idea was incredibly powerful,
And probably mixed with some like Hinduism or something.
and it caught the other religion.
Yeah, whatever it was.
Like Jesus was incredibly powerful.
And it rolled in a bunch of like Abrahamic and more ancient.
Yeah.
This isn't religion technically, but I was reading. There's a poem, Old Norse poem about the 3 great smiths, and 2 of the great smiths, I think one made 7 swords and one made 5 swords. So there's 12 swords.
Yeah.
And then Wayland, the 3rd smith, he forged the 13th sword.
What did Excalibur?
I don't know what it was, but it's very much like the Rings, right?
Yeah.
The Lord of the Rings. It's very much like Wayland Smith is Sauron, basically. Yeah. And I thought that because Wayland Smith as well, in some of the oldest legends, he's not whatever he is. He's the king of the elves, but he's at some point he stopped being the king of the elves and he became this mean, crooked smith who forged the 13th sword on his own, and he's the greatest of the smith, like the 3 smiths.
Yeah.
Like he's Sauron.
Yeah.
And it's so in comparative mythology, it goes to show that Wayland Smith must have been a real person if both the Lord of the Rings and the Norse myths agree on the same person.
Do you know who translated about 70% of all Norse mythology?
I think there's a danger. That is the danger in seeing the patterns in mythology. Like I'm very tempted to see the patterns in mythology, but I can see the patterns in Lord of the Rings in mythology too. And it's like, well, then there must be, and it's real. There must be a true story here. But I think also what part of that is, I think the Lord of the Rings might actually be a true story.
I think it is.
Like it's a distillation.
That's what Tolkien set out to make it.
Yeah, he wanted a British mythology.
Yeah.
And because a lot of stories are stories, right? Like the people, like Harry Potter, they're great stories, but they're stories. The Lord of the Rings is more like a myth. It does stuff to such a degree. It's more like a mythology.
Yeah. Well, Zuby asked Sargon Akkad this question, which is, what is the British identity? And Carl had some trouble answering it, but then he said, it is the Shire. That is the British identity.
They like to talk about things they already know.
Yeah, but it's the small, you're safe, you're content. The bigger problems of the world aren't there. You live in this wonderful countryside. You talk about things that are meaningless. The more meaningless, the better.
So do you think, like the British, right? They live on an island, right? If you're an Afghani, you've got Mongolians, you've got Chinese, you've got Russians, you've got like Ottomans. It's like, if your cultural myth is we all live in this little village and you get crushed.
Yeah.
And so it is very uniquely British in that sense, because you can't develop that somewhere else.
To the Northland in the UK, there are orcs that you must be careful of.
And actually...
And then to the, I guess to the west, to the east, there's goblins. And to the west, there's this strange land that you don't go to.
Pirates. Well,
No, there's this undying land full of fairies and weird elves
like the Irish.
to the west.
I was thinking of like the Welsh and the Corn,
the Welsh and Cornwall are more to the south, so that's just like the weird south. That's Rohan.
No. That's more like the Dunmen.
Yeah, they're Dunmen. Yeah, but Angmar is in the north, and that's where the orcs come from. And then there are the Easterlings, which are the French.
The Men of Woses were real. They were a real ancient British people.
Yes, the Wosies.
But the you said on a previous so listening to this Dan Carlin on the Twilight of the Aesir, right? You said ages ago that the British have never been conquered, right?
Yeah.
They're conquered by the Anglos, they're conquered by the Saxons, they're conquered by the Vikings like 3 times. They're conquered by the Normans. They're conquered by the Romans.
Actually, so this is where I'll admit my wrong. The Romans conquered them. That's the only nation that's conquered the English is the Romans.
No, Forkbeard conquered like all of England.
Nope.
Yeah.
Nope.
And then he gave it to Canute, his son.
Nope. there was still resistance against the Vikings. They weren't conquered.
There was resistance, but they were conquered. And the Normans conquered them so thoroughly that we don't speak Saxon anymore.
The Normans are British.
Well, they kind of are, but they're Viking British. So it's like conquered by Vikings 4 times in a way.
No. Okay, fine. They've been conquered twice. The Forkbeard for a bit, but they got kicked out. And the Romans for a bit, but they got kicked out.
And then all 13 kingdoms except for Anglia, which was, or whatever it was called, which Alfred was in charge of, were conquered as well. So that's like 12, 13...
Yeah, but did they conquer Alfred? No, they didn't.
And they should have conquered Alfred. There was something dodgy going on there. Like,
he is Alfred.
It was like 13-1 or 12-1. Like, how did he...
Okay, actually, one of the reasons how he did it, do you know what his castle was? You know Macbeth?
Yeah.
The castle that Macbeth goes to that can never be conquered?
Yeah.
That castle is based off the castle Alfred lived in. So, there's a swamp. And then, in this horrible swamp, there's a cliff. And there's a castle on that cliff. And that's his center of power. The Vikings didn't even know where this castle was. And every once in a while, expedition, they were trying to find it.
Was this London or
no?
Okay, because London was very hard to conquer as well. Yeah.
No, they would go into it and they just die in this swamp. And then the people who found this castle, they'd trek through a swamp and they get to this castle and they couldn't assail this castle. And then because the Vikings conquered, they didn't slaughter. Basically, the 13 kingdoms were conquered, but all the Normans or Anglos, wherever they were at the time, were still there. And so Alfred went around and basically said, all right, we're going to unite. We're going to synchronize our watches, guys. We're going to use the
I think
clock.
that was a bit later that they did that.
And we're all going to have tea time at the right time.
Yeah.
And pip pip cheerio, we'll all rise up at the same time and we'll kick out the Vikings.
That was something he talked about that was really interesting was Alfred united England.
Yeah.
But, people don't just overnight go,
No.
oh yeah, we're English, right? So there was times, I think it was fighting the Vikings, where they had to be careful not to, like, they didn't want the Mercians to be like, yeah, Mercians rule, we took out the Vikings. They needed to
They want to keep the Mercians away from the Egbertians.
Well, Egbert was like Alfred's grandfather. Right?
I know.
So he was an Anglish? He was Anglo. I don't know what they were called.
Britain?
British, maybe? I don't know. The Isles are Britain.
No, Britain.
But the Isles are Britain. So
yeah.
I don't know what the kingdoms were called.
Well, Anglo.
Yeah. Maybe he's like Anglia, so you'd be an Anglo. Except they were all Anglos, but Anglias were Angloers.
Yeah.
Angloer? I don't know. But and then if you're saying British aren't conquered, then you say, okay, so King Charles is a direct descendant of Boudica, or like because there used to be a lot of people there, right? Like they weren't all like Scots were conquered. They're part of Britain. The Welsh were conquered.
Those are the Scots and those are the Welsh.
But they're just the two tribes that lasted. Like there was a lot more tribes, and like the Celts were fighting with each other. Something that was really interesting to learn, though, was...
Have you ever played Europa Universalis and tried to be the Irish?
I'm playing as the Irish right now.
Yeah, so if you're not the one Irish group that's allied with Britain, it's really hard. If you're that group, it's smooth sailing. And how it works, right? So you're allied with the British. You take over Ireland, and then the British go wham and destroy you.
Well, actually, I'm playing...
And that's what happened.
So, interesting thing, apparently the Vikings, when they conquered, like, Britain.
Yeah.
They didn't conquer the Isles because what happened was, so they would go to Britain. This is like over hundreds upon hundreds of years, and they would just raid. But then they said, okay, they'd raid a town, and I'm staying here. And so there was Viking colonies all over Britain, and they couldn't kick them out. This wasn't them.
That was part of Alfred's treaty of not kicking them out.
But this, like, way before that, there was just colonies, and it wasn't them conquering the land. It was just the Vikings were forming colonies and like raiding outposts and all sorts of things.
Yeah, and then those colonies got raided by other Vikings.
And yeah, they did. And so the Vikings became part of British culture long before the wars between the Vikings and the English. And so they were integrated for a very long time. But
the kingdoms were a lot smaller then. It was just raiding parties of dudes.
But, well, I was thinking, right, one of the biggest first Viking raiding parties was like 3,000 Vikings, right?
Yeah.
If 3,000 heavily armored men showed up, like, in our city, I think they could take it. Like... 3,000 trained warriors just appearing out of nowhere with no warning. Just, they come down the river, bam, they're everywhere. Like, That's terrifying.
Yeah, they can navigate a dam. That's pretty freaky.
They can go around it. Portage.
Just, what are all those guys doing? Just a bunch of guys carrying a Viking
Traffic's
longship.
Traffic's held up as like 3,000 Vikings portage on the dam.
No, they're not. They're not they're like full Black Ops mercenaries.
Yeah.
But they have a Viking longship.
Just portaging around the dam. Yeah. But Ireland didn't have the same problem. So the Vikings, they'd get involved in British politics and say, hey, you need to fight this, you need to do this, you need to... In Ireland, the Irish politics was so insane and so violent and so backstabby, the Vikings couldn't take control and they couldn't integrate.
Yeah, well, it's like the Vikings land in Ireland, and then the Irish steal their votes.
Yeah, it was just this totally different culture of like...
A group of Pikeys come and steal their vote.
Well, because the Irish were so fractured, the Vikings couldn't do anything. Because it was like, oh, you've come to Ulster? Okay, yeah, we'll be our allies, except we're at war with each other and them, except we're also allied with the guys we're at war with against them, but then they're attacking these guys, so therefore we decided to flip alliances with both of these people. And
I don't know if this is true. I'd like to think they probably made Scotland as well, but they decided to go a little bit deeper and they end up in the Highlands. And I was like, let's just stick to the lowlands. Let's avoid these guys.
Well, yeah,
because the Highlanders were lunatics.
There was a lot of fighting between the Vikings and the Scots, and a lot of rape and pillaging. Like, I think basically all Scottish DNA has Scandinavian DNA in it, like all of it. And then, of course, it
explains the red hair too.
Yeah, and the size of the Scots to a degree, I think, as well. Like, they were, so the Vikings were doing a lot of stuff for a long time, but...
Funny accent.
I think a really interesting place is Iceland, because the Vikings founded Iceland, except there was Irish monks there before them, but how the Irish monks got there is a kind of a weird question, because they would have had to get there in like King Arthur's time or something, or before, and
they're Irish monks.
They're like riding a whale, like in the story. You know how like it said, the North America was discovered by Irish monks, right? Yeah. There's, and then there's the stories of Ireland. I keep bringing it up because it fascinates me to no end, but being descended from the Egyptians, right, and the Atlanteans, and Ireland being the blessed isles of the Greek mythology.
The old lands, the Crach.
But like Elysium, Ireland being the
that's what that is, the Crach, or whatever. I'm saying it wrong, but it's basically Ireland's roots run so ridiculously deep that the Irish blood or whatever is so ridiculously there. It's more so than almost any other place. There's a feeling in the air.
But it'd be weird if the Irish, and then the other thing about the Irish is they're almost unique on Earth for their appearance. Like, red hair you don't see it anywhere else, like except Scotland, basically, and some of the Scandinavians.
Yeah,
but that was rare among the Scandinavians, and so it was those Celts of those regions, basically.
Well, maybe a great cataclysm happened that sucked out the soul of Ireland.
Well, I don't think they lost their soul.
No, there's a bunch of soulless gingers there.
Oh, I see. Right.
No, but the Irish are, you're right, very new, because incredibly pale skin. Because the red-haired Vikings, and even the red-haired Scots to a certain extent, they've got leathery, more brown skin. But the Irish is very pale.
Yeah, fair-skinned,
Fair-skinned, light-colored hair, red hair.
Green eyes, which is also unusual.
Green or very light blue.
Yeah, and those are also rare colors. Yeah. They're a very rare mixture of things, and they're still around. And their musical tradition is like none other that I'm aware of. I don't think there is another. Like, they have a musical instrument on their flag. That's quite something. And they
too much fairy blood in them. Or Atlantean.
But then they also, if they are the Blessed Lands, they also have Tir na Nog themselves, so that'd be kind of weird, because then that's like, oh yeah, this is the Blessed Lands, but the even blesseder lands.
Is Tir na Nog
the Blessed Isles? Yeah.
Well, no. Where is Arthur right now?
Avalon.
Yeah, is Tir na Nog Avalon? Or are they different plots?
I think they would be different places.
Yeah.
Because...
Well, isn't Tir na Nog under the sea?
or across the sea or something like that.
Yeah.
But the story of the man who went to Tir na Nog, Finn McCool's son. It was a timeless place that sort of bewitched him. It wasn't meant for mortals.
Yeah.
And I don't think that would be a good place to bring Arthur to.
No, Avalon's different.
Because Avalon's more like the Blessed Isles.
Avalon's the island of the witches.
Avalon is Elysium.
Yeah.
Avalon is the Blessed Isles. Avalon is the place. It's the afterlife. It's like, the Blessed Isles, or what do they call it in Lord of the Rings? The place where all the elves go.
Undying Lands.
Yeah, that's Avalon basically. And I don't know where that would be, because you think you sail out to sea and you hit Ireland or you hit like Estonia.
Avalon wasn't across the sea.
I've heard Estonia is quite beautiful.
Avalon wasn't across the sea. This is one of the weirdest things about Avalon. Avalon was in a lake.
You know the British have eels in their lakes?
Yep, they eat them. There's actually laws about how many jellied eels you have to pay in taxes.
Like
there's a ridiculous amount of laws around jellied eels.
So doesn't eels seem like an Asian thing? Like,
yeah,
I find it weird that like the eel people are the British.
It was one of their staple foods was eel. They had huge amounts of laws around them, huge amount of tradition around eels.
Just seems like we're supposedly descended from these people, and I've never traditional eel here. Like, okay, I've had eel, and eel's delicious, but
jellied eel?
No, I haven't had jellied eel, and it doesn't. I've had baked eel with sauces.
Eel steak with sauce.
Yeah,
that's the literal translation. Dawn is a steak,
and it was a Japanese eel, obviously, and the British, in their typical British way, was probably cold and disgusting.
That's why jellied eel was evoking you.
Because I don't know where the jelly comes from, but I do know there's a lot of sea creatures that can turn water into mucus, and that concerns me. Because there's a lot of sea creatures out there that have like filaments they can just put in.
Well, it was river eels, actually, though. It's not sea eels. Right,
but maybe they have river slime going on. And like everything in Britain is depressing, right? Like there's their food is like boiled stuff, and
so good.
And no, boiled. It's like they eat like boiled grains and boiled vegetables and boiled meat.
Do you know what my diet is?
And their weather, it's dark and it's cold. All like the temperature never changes, and they can't stand heat or cold.
Their temperature is so nice there.
And
they have like the perfect human temperature.
No, they don't. Hawaii has the perfect human temperature.
No, it's the UK. Nice rain overhead.
I think Hawaii is the place to be. Or I've never been to Africa, but I've seen videos of Africa where I think, man, that looks like home. I don't know. I think Africa's got some nice locations. That's one of those things where history gets weird, right? We all came from Africa, and now it's looking like the whole Chinese story of, no, we're not African, we're descended from the Denisovans, or whoever it might be correct. Like, the people might have been everywhere, always.
Yep.
And
we do know the Beringia crossing happened.
Yes, but that could have been more equivalent to something like Christopher Columbus discovering North America. It could have been a bunch of people crossed because they were starving, and there's a bunch of people there going, what are you doing? What?
Yeah.
And the Dene are like, get out of here. Because
the Weigel are eating people, or the Wego, whatever those are
the
called.
Dene stories, actually, they are from Alaska, but these days they're not in Alaska. They are in the NWT. Like, they moved a very long way.
Yeah.
Because they were like, there's monkey men.
Run away!
Run from the, like, literal monkey men.
Yeah.
And so
they moved from that place with the monkey men to the place with the Wego.
Oh, they moved past the Walia and the
Walia, that's
the giant wolves, yeah. And the
werewolves,
the Nahani,
yeah.
And they moved past the Nahani people, who are these people that take your heads, and these cannibals, and they killed all the monkey people, and they ran into the Inuit a bunch of times, and they had to deal with them a bunch of times. And yeah, they just kept moving.
And they lived on horrible wet rocks.
And so the question about the Dene, I guess, is, are they the Beringia? Are they who crossed Beringia? Right, that's kind of the question. If there's people here, like you look at the Bluefish Caves, you look at White Sands. There's people here for like 20,000 years. So who are the originals?
Here's one of the things that I find interesting on that is First Nations people and Mongolians look remarkably similar.
Yeah.
Like our First Nations in the Yukon, anyways.
Yeah. And like the Sampi or Sami people.
Yeah. Yeah, like they look remarkably similar. American First Nations are actually quite different. Wild Horse. If you look up Wild Horse, he's actually got like a kind of Roman nose.
Yeah, they're chiseled. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's like they've got the larger nose, the very square jaws, like the.
But the northern First Nations are much more Asian.
Yeah, Asian, and then
the southern First Nations, they look Polynesian.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Polynesian. Like you central, like the Mexicans are with the Spanish, but if you look, it's really mixed actually. So it's hard to find.
But like the
Asian
Inca and the
Mexicans.
Mayans, and
Yeah.
they look like they're from like Hawaii or something.
Yeah, and
then you look at the Olmec and they look African.
yeah, well, the Incans actually, like their drawings of themselves, they're like the people that disappeared, I guess. They look Persian.
But like you've seen the Olmec as well,
Yeah.
right? Like those giant stone heads.
Yeah.
They're the people that the Incans didn't know who they were. The Incans were like, these people were gone long before
Yeah.
we came here, and we've been here forever.
Yeah.
And they look African.
Yeah.
And so I think people have been... Now, this doesn't... What I think partly here, this doesn't mean there's advanced technology in the past at all. I think people are just way better at traveling than we give them credit for.
Yeah.
Because you look at the stories of like the medieval ages, and you know, you sort of hear nowadays still saying, oh yeah, you know, people couldn't travel because of medieval ages. But then you hear stories and it's like the Varangian Guard. It's like, oh yeah, I was in Sweden and then I went down to Constantinople and then I went... And then you hear about like Ibn Fazd or whatever his name was, like the most traveled person on history.
The more conspiracy side of history is the Teutonic Order, or not?
Yeah, they went and met with the Mayans or something, right?
They made it to North America.
Yeah.
They had tunnels underground that they.
Well, we know they did that at some point because the Oak Island exists.
Yeah, but
that could have been much later.
it could be much later. But
there's in... You're talking about in Peru, there are caves with Templar iconography carved into them.
and there's tunnels that haven't been fully explored that potentially go underneath the entire ocean.
Really?
Yes, there are certain tunnels that potentially go underneath the entire ocean, and there are thoughts.
Wouldn't there be like lava in the way and cliffs?
Yeah, well, these are problems. There's like pressure, there's cliffs, like there's a huge amount of problems, but there's also a really good amount of evidence that some Christian order of knights basically walked underneath the ocean.
Shouldn't like they're Christians? Why don't they walk on top of it? You know,
That's only the king.
like Jesus.
That's only Christ.
When Jesus said, "I'll teach you to be a fisher of men," he was talking about crossing the ocean. Yeah,
Now he's telling them how to pick up men.
when Jesus dropped the golden tablets for John Smith to find.
Yeah. He took a few crusaders with him.
Yeah, and they went to South America and they carved the carving. But then also there's stories of the Mayans have stories of seeing dragons off the coast, just like ships with dragon heads.
What's really interesting about
that could be the Vikings.
No, that could be the Chinese. Because if you look at the few maps we have of before the burning of the Great Fleet, the few things they have and the few like stories about is so their fleets went across the entire world.
Yeah.
They had mapped the whole world. And then they're like, all right, this is the world that exists. This is China. This is the world that exists. And so they're like, this is going to be a long journey, but we're going to conquer the whole world. So their boats had orchards in them, and they had animal farms, and they had like ways to collect rainwater. These were massive boats. And like, all right, we're ready to go. Then Emperor goes, bleh, and dies. And then his son's like, only China exists.
Well, it wasn't that he died so much. It was he sent all his best people on those boats, and so then he's just sitting alone, and people are like, "Hey, revolution!"
Yeah,
because he was a usurper himself, and his father before him was a usurper.
Anyway, so he blips.
Yeah.
Those boats come back. This massive treasure fleet, and then the guy took over. Only China exists. Get rid of those boats. We're not taking over the whole world. But in the time that they're mapping, like there could have been Chinese boats just show up, and the mines were like, "There's a dragon."
I have the book. What's it called? 1414, the year China discovered the world, or whatever. Yeah. That's that was 2001. I think the book was released, where it shows a bunch of these old maps, and then there's even older maps that show Antarctica before it had ice on it, and you go.
Well, here's something else. So there's a Scottish clan called the Duncans.
Yeah.
And so this isn't even a nation. This is just the Duncans, and it's like a small clan. But if you look at their family history, they really liked boats. And they have maps of North America, and they have maps of Norway, and they have maps of Spain, and they have like... I don't think they made it as far to India, but this individual group of people, this Scottish clan, just like, let's get in a boat and go look at things.
Yeah.
And that's what they did. And so they went across the ocean.
And we've talked about sweet potatoes before.
Yeah.
But the Polynesians were starving in Hawaii. And they're like, hey, we're going out west. Or, sorry, east. And then they came back. They're like, hey, the people there are really kind. And they give us these potatoes that grow anywhere. And they're full of nutrients. And so it's this... Because there's this ancient Polynesian history of sweet potatoes, right? Like, you have that two-finger dip that it's like that purple slop.
Yeah.
That's made from sweet potatoes. And it's this cultural thing. But sweet potatoes are from Peru.
Yeah.
And so the Polynesians seem to have made it to South America.
Yeah.
Or... Because the theory for a long time was sweet potatoes had floated over.
Mm.
But the problem with that is some scientists were like, okay, cool, let's chuck some sweet potatoes in the ocean and see what happens. And they just fell apart. Like, oh, okay. They don't do so good on the old floating.
No.
Now maybe like a swallow carried them.
Yeah.
They flew across the... Or I like the pumice raft theories. I don't know if there's ever been any proof of them, but they're kind of fun.
Well, the Galapagos has a bunch of plants that shouldn't. And that's because birds drop them there.
Or maybe the plants swim.
Mm.
I was thinking about...
Well, our trees, right?
Yeah.
They have this ridiculous life cycle, which is they just sit there, the pine trees and spruce trees, they just sit there for ages. And they sort of like, meh.
And then they catch fire.
Well, no, so they catch fire.
Yeah.
Their seeds go everywhere. All right, locusts, right? So they're basically grasshoppers. And then eventually, if you have too many of them in an area, their population can't be sustained anymore. And so they start rubbing all over each other. And that causes their bodies to physically transform. And they grow these giant wings, their mandibles get bigger, and they go insane, and they spread out in these huge swarms and eat everything. And so the species has this radical change. Now, have I talked about naked mole rats?
No?
Alright, naked mole rats live in colonies with a brood mother, and they act a lot like ants.
Really?
Yeah, they're the only, what is it called? Like the ant-like society, which basically insects only do?
Eusocial something.
Eukaryote.
Yeah, something like
Yeah,
that.
so naked mole rats are a eukaryotic mammal. They're the only one on Earth that does that. But they have colonies all over the places. They live in these colonies.
What about people?
No, people are just a very large tribal herd animal. But these things, like, everything is for the brood mother. They dig tunnels to expand out food. They eat each other's poop. They're really weird.
Yeah.
We don't know how new colonies form. We still don't know how a new naked mole rat colony forms. We've never witnessed it. We've never found it.
It's obvious, isn't it? Like a female mole rat eats a bunch of mole rat jelly, and it goes through a metamorphosis.
Well,
and becomes the mole rat queen.
One of the thoughts is mole rats might have a locust swarm phase that they might do. They might, if the population of a colony gets too big of naked mole rats, then they might go into a mental state which causes them to rapidly spread out and then form new colonies.
So I know amphibians are quite biologically flexible.
Yeah.
And fish as well.
Yeah.
And even birds, like chickens, have shown they can do minor changes, like swapping sex in some rare cases or something like that. Mammals are pretty stable, I thought.
Yeah, so with naked mole rats, well, they're weird. They're really weird. They're weird genetically, too. Yeah. But it could just be a mental change with them. Like, they might not actually transform. But who knows? Maybe at some point, these giant monsters will burst out of the ground and, like, just go on a rampage, and those are naked mole rats.
Yeah.
Like, that's possible. It's very unlikely, but it's possible. But what if, like, plants have that? Like, the sweet potatoes, there's too many sweet potatoes in the area, and then they just sort of stand up and start walking, and they get into the ocean and start swimming.
The entwives of the sweet potatoes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But my point is, we don't know how naked mole rat colonies start. And there's scientists, because there's scientists who specialize in fields, and naked mole rats are actually really cool because they're really weird. There are a lot of naked mole rat scientists. And they still don't know how new colonies are formed. And we have just no idea. So there's a lot of things we don't know. So, like history, but also biology. So with the sweet potato spreading, who knows?
So, two other fields where there's a lot of people in them, volcanology and astronomy. And we don't know. So the problem with the universe expanding, I've talked about it before, is there's two methods for measuring the expansion of the universe. One of them is based upon the wavelength of the planets, and the other is based upon predictions of gravity or something.
Yeah.
And as our measurements get more accurate of both, the two values diverge.
Yeah.
Because the error bars used to overlap, but now they diverge, so that only one of them seems to be possible to be correct. That doesn't make any sense. And then volcanology, they don't know how volcanoes work. They don't know why they work. Right. So, what I'm suggesting
is mole rats shoot out volcanoes to expand the universe?
Yes. is mole rats. They dig a tunnel, right, into a magma holding sac, which allows them to evolve into the mole rat queen. But the sudden expansion of mass, it explains dark matter as well. It's like, why is there more matter than we can account for in the universe? It's all the mole rat energy. And so they expand, volcanoes go off, and that pushes the planets further apart than they should be. And so we don't need the tired light theory. It's actually just mole rats absorbing energy from the visible spectrum to turn it into matter. It's like epigenetics are fascinating. Like, I was thinking about, you talked about No More Mr. Nice Guy, where his theory is that people were afraid of their parents who were traumatized by the war.
Yeah.
And so they created this generation of borderline people and narcissists and whatnot. But I don't know if this is true. I don't know much about epigenetics, right? But it seems to me that, let's say you flip an epigenetic switch so that you can withstand hotter temperatures, right?
Yeah.
It seems to me that it would be weird if your child was born with the switch flipped the wrong way. Like they're born with the cold weather switch and then they have to switch, because then you'd lose a lot of children until they adapted, right? Yeah. So it seems to me that if the parent flips, their reproductive organs should also flip over so that their kid is born with the correct configuration for their environment. Now, I don't know if that's the case or not. Is that the case? Do you know?
Well, the genes might change with epigenetics.
I'm not saying the genes, like, they mutate. I'm just saying, like, we've got a hot mode and a cold mode.
Yeah.
And if you're in hot mode, your Ganymedes?
Your kid should have a 33% chance of getting the hot gene if it's flipped.
Well, they don't get the gene. It's just they start flipped or something.
That's what I'm saying. They have the flipped hot gene. So they have a 50% chance of getting it.
Versus, is that higher than normal or?
No, they get the flipped one. Is you get 50% of your parents' genetics. So if both parents had it, then you should get it.
But I'm just wondering if there's, I'm wondering if it's like there's a default state and then an adaptive state, or if there's two possible states and you just sort of choose one, or if the kids just have a random flipping of all their epigenetic
studies is still very new.
Okay, but let's say, because it would make sense, sort of evolutionary perspective, that you have whatever your parents have, at least to begin with, right?
I think so.
So, because I was thinking, what if World War II and I, rather than traumatize the parents on a psychological level that they pass on to their children, what if it's actually like you go into like panic survival epigenetic phase where in humans, plants sometimes they'll have like a water leaf that's all wavy and an air leaf that's all smooth. Yeah. Humans, we don't have like that same thing necessarily. But we do see, if you look at photos of people from about 1910 to 1980, you say, man, they look so much older and more mature than they did at my age, right? Yeah. And it's long been thought, that's a social thing. Your parents are going to look older, right? But if you look at photos of people from like 1850, they look about the same as people your age. Like you see a 20-year-old from 1850, he looks about the same as a 20-year-old from like 2010 sort of thing, right? Yeah. There were people aged. Like there was this time period. And you see it with the Europeans as well, like Germans especially. They tend to look older than, like Japanese people tend to look quite a bit younger, right? Yeah. So I wonder if the war actually like flipped a switch in a generation and then, but there's a reason why the switch isn't flipped, right? There's trade-offs, right? So you're in high alert mode and your children are born in high alert mode. Yeah. And then they need to reset or something. And
well, it's in like high stress, high alert mode, right? Presidency and other prime minister things, but it's being most of certain presidents, like those guys go, they've like, you can watch them age in real time, sort of thing with the president. So like maybe it's an epigenetics that makes you older.
It'd be really interesting if a president had a kid while in office. If that kid was like, had a worse life outcome expectancy.
Kid's born with an old man's scowl and just grows up white-haired and balding.
But anyways, I think we'll leave it there for today. So thank you for sticking around.